Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Adults and Health Scrutiny panel on this quite blustery evening. So just to introduce ourselves, I'm Councillor Pippa. I currently chair this scrutiny panel, and I'll start with Councillor Donovan.
I'm Sean O'Donovan, I'm Councillor for Tottenham Hale.
Cathy Brennan, Councillor for Muswell Hill.
I'm Sarah, member for Woodside.
Right, and then Joe, do you just want to introduce yourself at this point?
Jo Beatty, I'm the Director of Adult Social Care.
Mrs Desneps, Cabinet Member for Health, Social Care and Wellbeing.
Neil Sinclair, Head of Finance.
Excellent, thank you. Dominic, have we got any apologies for absence?
Yes, apologies for absence received from Councillor Peacock and from Helen Collier, and also apologies for lateness from Councillor Focus.
Lovely, thank you. Just to note, this meeting is it's recorded, isn't it? It's not being filmed.
It's been recorded and audio and video.
Audio and video, right, stand corrected. Thank you. And this will be made, this will be put out on the public sites. So anyone entering this, you will be recorded and just let you all know. Any items of urgent business, Dominic?
No.
Okay. Any declarations of interest in terms of the budget? No. Okay, I'll take that as a no. Any deputations, presentations or questions? No. Minutes, pages 1 to 16. Just so you know, there are actions on this that will be coming up within the tracker. The tracker will be provided at the end of the meeting tonight, and that will be in the work programme. So is there anything else that you wanted to ask in relation to the minutes?
No.
Anyone? Anything on accuracy? So we're happy it's accurate and you're happy to receive and accept the minutes? Right, okay. The tracker, so that report is to follow, and as I said, that's going to be, our scrutiny officer will speak to the tracker at the end of the work programme agenda item. So we're going to go swiftly on to the scrutiny of the 26-27 draft budget, the 5-year medium-term financial strategy, which goes up to 2031, and that's on pages 17 to 86. So I'm just going to start with sort of some housekeeping things because there's a few documents to look at this evening. So we've got in a spreadsheet that should all be in front of you for this evening. At the top, we've got a summary table of all the pressures and savings. We've already got that in our agenda pack, but that's just for clarity here. We asked for the previously approved pressures and savings to be included so that we understood as a panel what we had previously. So you'll see under data approved, some are sort of 2024, some are 2023. So you'll see there what were previously approved and what's currently going on in year, so 26, or for the future year 26-27. So that column there will be telling you what those agreed savings are going to be going forward. And then at the bottom, you've got the new pressures, which we've got also in our pack this evening, and the new savings, which is at the very bottom, number 3, the new savings. Again, that's all in our pack. So what wasn't in our pack was this middle section, which was the previously approved pressures and savings. So we will briefly be looking at that as part of the agenda pack tonight. So just know what that is. So we've got 5 documents in the budget item tonight. We've got the cover report. Then we're going on to pages 21 to 56, which is the cabinet report on the budget. So that sets out the main details of the overall budget and MTFS. So that's an area for us to look at as a panel. And if you want to make any sort of recommendations on the MTFS, we can do at that point. We will then have a look at the previously approved pressures and savings, which is on this spreadsheet. Then we've got page 61 to 66 in the pack, and that's the appendices. And we've got adults, housing and health. We'll obviously remove the housing aspects. We're going to look at that in a lot more detail. That's where we're going to be concentrating in on. Page 81 is a more detailed about the new savings proposed. So that's in a lot more detail, and that'll be taken as part of the one above. And then, yeah, that's it. So that's how we're going to go through this evening. So if we could try and do the questions in those so we don't skip, because otherwise I think people might get a bit lost as to what we're doing. That would be really good. Okay, so I'm going to start by saying, Neil, I think you're opening the meeting for us really, and giving us a brief overview of what's happening regarding the budgets. And I know we've asked you this, so hopefully you're ready to sort of set us straight on what's actually going on. Thank you.
I'll do my best to set you straight on this, on the budget so far. I think, as said in the report, the financial position the council's facing is extremely challenging. This is driven by increasing demand and price of services. We're seeing trends from previous years and current year continuing into next year. And this is largely around social care, temporary accommodation and inflation, but also other areas such as housing benefits and our property estate. So these comments about the whole budget, not just at the social care outset. Over the summer, we've been looking at a range of our pressures for next year, starting with the position in the current year and to estimate what we think these pressures will be in future years. We'll talk about specifically about for as social care tonight, but at a council level, based on the latest information, we're forecasting at least an additional 30 million will be needed, mainly across social care, but also across temporary accommodation. Over the summer, we'll also be identifying new proposals to reduce costs and increase income. This has resulted in £7 million of savings which have been put forward, of which 2.3 million will be subject to consultation, of which the scrutiny panel plays a key role. Although the number of new savings are relatively small, there are £14.9 million previously approved savings for the next year in total, and subject to the outcome of the consultation, £21.9 million of savings will be delivered next year on top of the 30 million in the current year, which we know from the in-year warrant report, some are at risk of delivery. These are not insignificant sums. Finally, we have reviewed all corporate assumptions around likely inflation and interest rates. Bringing this all together and with statutory requirement to set a balanced budget, this means that next year we're estimating, if nothing else changes, we need to apply to government for an additional £57 million of exceptional financial support. On top of this, we know the use of exceptional financial support in the current year will be required. Panel will see in the quarter 2 report when it comes in December, but based on the 1 report, up to £71 million of exceptional financial support may be needed in the current year. And this is made up of the £37 million of exceptional financial support assumed when we set the budget, and the forecast overspend of £34 million. The work has been done to estimate pressures for the next year, takes account of overspend in the current year, and that is expected to continue into next year. But there is an expected to be a structural exceptional financial support ask of £47 million and 10 million from 24-25 and £37 million in 25-26. If we're taking all this into account and using the figures in the report, the total exceptional financial support asked from the government could be up to 140 million for 26-27. That is shown in chart 2. So just to reference chart 2, chart 2 is on page 23 of the NCFS report. I apologise because I think my numbering I took was from the page number and the attached documents. So,
Right.
So I'll guide you to that. So you actually look at the right table. So give me a second. So
Do we know what page, what to?
We should.
chart 2 is on section 12.31 of the budget report. Got that?
That is
Yeah.
page 43.
Chart 3. Yes, chart 3. I think chart 2 has got the heading just on the previous page. So on your right hand.
Page 43 on the.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, it's the one with the
41.
2 bar charts. That's the one. Yes, that's chart 2. Not on the top of the page. Thank you. So we'll go back to it. So just to reiterate what I just said there. If we're taking this into account, using the figures in this report, the total exceptional financial support ask for the government could be up to 104 million. So for 26-27, as shown in this chart 2. So chart 2 helps identify that. You can see where that appears. This position is clearly not sustainable, and you can see in the charts because obviously it keeps increasing. In terms of how this is shown in the numbers in the reports, the budget gap in table 6. So table 6 is just 2 pages further on from that. So
Page 45.
yeah. You can see the detail of, and that's puts in context where adult social care sits within the overall numbers, and you can see the overall position for each directorate. So, in terms of implications, we've obviously got the variance arising at the end of 25-26, as we know is a risk of adult social care. If the overspend increases above the 34 million forecast in Q1, our exceptional financial support requirement in the current year will exceed 71 million. This may not necessarily increase the exceptional financial support ask for 26-27 if some of those overspends are one-off, or if we were to factor it into the £30 million additional budget estimates for pressures 26-27. So, whilst it could be a risk that we see an overspend in the current year, some of that may not be recurring, and we've also built some of that into our planning in terms of pressures for the coming year. Exceptional financial support numbers are really complex, and getting the number right is affected by a number of moving parts, which is why we apply for an amount to get the principal agreement to allow us to set a balanced budget, but the final figures are not confirmed until accounts are closed at year end. So it is a moving picture. So particularly just now, we're actually doing everything we can to reduce expenditure, spending on certain non-statutory services, and controls are in place on all spending over £1,000 and new recruitment. There are new controls on commissioning contracts, and we're reviewing every pound we spend. Although no new savings come forward for 26-27, we had, like last year, second round of budget proposals, because we're focusing on capacity and resources on delivering our existing savings. Officers across the council will continue to look for efficiencies and improve income collection, and also hope to contribute towards the budget cap. Before we get to the final budget in February, we may reduce the EFS ask, or exceptional financial support ask. We can see from the 5-year position, the demand and forecast is forecast to continue to increase, and our priority is to minimise use of exceptional financial support and continue to lobby the government that the current funding system is not sustainable to meet statutory requirements.
Thank you, Neil. Okay.
That was quite long.
That was a lot in there. Okay, so that's what I said, I think earlier. We're just going to go through this reasonably slowly and, at a steady pace, so that we're really clear what we're sort of speaking about by the end of it. But thank you, Neil. That's really helpful to have you set that out for us right at the outset. I think that just gives us a bit of a sort of an understanding on where we're at. So I'm just going to clarify what I think you've told us, one section of that. So my understanding is from the papers that we had exceptional financial support of 10 million previous year, 24-25.
That's correct.
We're looking at 37 million exceptional financial support in 25-26 at the moment. And then there's 57 million pounds for the following. So that's the 104 million that you referenced before in the chart.
Yes.
So I'm just going to go back to it. So on page 43, when you talked about the forecast cumulative EFS, that 104 million, that's where that figure.
It does.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so and then the 6%, £6 million is the interest underneath on that chart.
Yeah.
So do we add that £6 million to the 104? That'd be 110, or is that cumulative?
Separate. So as which graph I'm looking at?
The 6.1 million is just the interest
Yeah.
payment
It's just interest.
on the 104 million.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's how I understand it. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the 8.01 million in the following year is based on the 136.7 million.
So the interest of the 6.1 million, where does that get added into future years' budgets? Because obviously this is a 20-year.
It will have to. We will have to repay that. So
Yes.
a pressure that we have to then plan within our overall financial envelope.
Right. And is that stated anywhere in the, sorry, just being really clear, so we're just all clear what we're sort of looking at. Is that stated anywhere in the papers in a chart format, or is that just, or not just, is that in that table
As in
there,
that table,
but it
I'm
isn't-
not sure,
it doesn't come in anywhere
it's
else.
not specifically, it will be within overall interest repayments, MRP, somewhere.
I missed that. Sorry. If you've got the MRP, but if you haven't, then we can send that to us. That's fine. I didn't see that in the papers, but I could have easily missed it. There's a lot in here, so
Good.
I could easily miss that. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to start off with one question. I'm going to go to the panel. We'll start, whoever puts their hands up can. So I'm going to ask around going back sort of to the beginning, really, when you said about, so on page 35, and you said the forecast outturn was an overspend of 34 million. So, I mean, I know we're talking about adult social care here, which is 7.6 million. So I'm going to look to Joe and to Neil. How are we doing at the moment in terms of, and I know we've only had Q1, but what's the direction of travel at the moment within adult social care? Are we looking realistically at being able to reduce this, or do you think there's either going to be the pressure same, or there could be spending more? So I'm going to leave it to either of you to answer.
You start with that and I'll chip in.
The direction of travel is positive, if anything, because we are maintaining controls. And I think Taryn said it very clearly that we're doing everything we can to reduce expenditure. So I think we're seeing no worsening of the position. And I think when we come to Q2, we hope to expect to see an improved position. We'll be able to report on adult social care.
And I think that's good news. But it's important to recognise that demand isn't going down. The controls are helping our position, and a number of measures around ensuring that we're maximising income, that we're claiming grants that we should claim, and that we're looking at joint funding arrangements and ensuring that we're paying what we should be paying and not what health should be paying. And I think, the year that I've been here, that has come thick and fast. Those protective measures, those checks and balances have really been showcased from Taryn as a 151 officer, as you'd expect her to. And I think culturally it's making a real impact in the service.
Okay.
Finance is becoming everybody's business, whether they're at the front line or in a more senior leadership position. So we worked hard to do that, didn't we? And a year ago, I wondered how that would go, because I've not been in a council where that has happened as a whole council approach. But I think we are seeing the benefits. Yeah.
We definitely are, and I think there's obviously a saving for next year. Talks to about the ability to improve our contribution towards care. I think some of that work we're doing already is starting to bear fruit in the current year, so that's starting to make a difference. So there's a number of things we're doing, and as Joe mentioned, around joint funding, making sure our grants are properly accounted for. That's allowed us to do a number of things to ensure that our grant income is matched with appropriate budgets for placements as well. So I think that's helped us in terms of a good position, but recognise that, as Joe suggested, that demand has not decreased in terms of cost.
So I think Taryn's been quite clear, I think, with us when she's been briefing around that if we don't reduce that overspend of 34 million, then of course we have to add that on to the 37. So that gives us a 70 plus, which is, that does, 37 is huge. I mean, we're talking enormous figures, and it's quite hard to sort of get our heads around it. But I think that just adds that emphasis in, isn't it, on adult social care, because we've got the 22% of that, the overspend at the moment. So you're saying to us, Joe, at the moment, and Neil, that you're looking that the direction of travel is positive, even though the demand is still increasing and putting the pressure on. You think our overspend when we come to Q2, Q3 is showing a better position?
Well, we'll continue to grip in the way that we have been.
Right.
And we obviously have other measures in place to address our overspend. And some of that is around how we commission and what we commission, and our relationship with providers, residential nursing, etc. And as Neil tells me all the time, that's always a very tricky space for us, because we want to make sure that people are being paid the London living wage, and we want to sustain a workforce within the wider care market that gives our residents stability and decent quality of care. But we have got some incredibly challenging residents coming through all the time. Sort of certainly in my career, the complexity of things that people are dealing with has got significantly more, and hence those providers that are left in the marketplace, particularly when they're out of borough, will feel that they can charge hugely inflated, bluntly, weekly costs, and some boroughs, of course, can afford to pay more than we can. So that commissioning space is really important. So as well as the issues around checks and balances, whole council approach, it's about getting our commissioned offer right and our relationship with providers right. And then, of course, the savings.
Okay, thank you very much. I noticed I had Councillor Brennan and then Councillor Donovan. If you'd like to ask your questions, thank you.
Okay, I've got 3 questions. They're all quite different. So one is on page 45. So when we've got, I'm looking at the new pressures, right? So we've got new pressures 26, 27. We've got 30, 30059, and then you go to the next year and it's halved. The new pressures have halved, and they've sort of gone down to 15. How secure, how sure are we that we are going to manage to keep our new pressures lower? Because because we know that demand is increasing massively, and for me the worry is that because demand is increasing massively, we'd almost be lucky if we could stop our new pressures increasing, never mind halving them. So that's the first question. I just want to say, how secure are we, and how are we going to do that? That's one thing. Then I've got a second thing is, I understand that there is something where we charge, when we're charging care plans, we estimate, we charge them an estimate, and then after the event we work out exactly how much they should pay, and we actually charge that money later. So and I heard that we're trying to change that system so that we charge the right amount up front, because we're actually losing money by charging something at the beginning and then actually finding out exactly what we should be charging later. And then so how far away again are we from changing that system so that we're actually trying to charge more realistically up front, because that would make a great deal of difference. So I'm probably more interested in where the opportunities we have of actually getting the money that we should be getting, rather than trying to make savings, because I think trying to make savings is particularly difficult. And then I have a third query where really all I've written down is how far off, which is a bit dodgy. I think it must be relating to something that Councillor Connor was saying.
Can I ask Councillor Brennan, to hold the second question that you asked, because that is exactly the question we're going to be doing on the new savings. Right at the end, that's the new savings pressure.
Fees and charges.
Fees and charges. So you've asked the right question, but if you could hold it.
Okay, so I'll hold that question. That was just in my head.
I know. I'm just going to put it. Otherwise, we'll skip to the end of the agenda in the middle. So
fine. Well, my last question will say all I've literally written is how far off. So I'd have to ask Councillor Connor what that question was, because it was something relating to what she said.
I'll think about that. We'll start with the first question. We'll go to the first.
I think Neil's maybe going to take the first one around.
Yeah, I can take one around pressures. It's about combining a number of things, because we can only talk to the element of the 30 million, which is adult social care. So within adult social care, and this is related to the single sheet you've got as well. So if you take a look at that single sheet, the top 3 lines which comprises 2.8 million, 4.5 million, and the 930,000. That's 8.2 million of the pressures we built in last year or built in previous years.
So just to be clear, so Neil, you're right at the top of
Yep.
the
It's
Yeah.
the main table.
right,
So
you've
you've
got
got
new pressures.
3 lines. So the adult social care pressure budgets, growth from demography, pressures, inflation, COVID legacy, and the second.
Here, the
Yeah.
ones that
It's those 3 lines. Sorry, yeah.
I get
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So when you're thinking of previously agreed pressures, so if you kind of link the elements together, so that table that Councillor Brennan you're referring to has got previously agreed pressures of 46 million, new pressures of 30 million. So the new pressures of 30 million contains 2 elements of adult social care. And those in that same sheet, if you go down further down the page, you've got new pressures, which is section 2. So that's the 10.6 million. So of the 30 million, there's 10.6 million of that associated with adult social care.
Okay,
I see.
Do you get those numbers?
Yeah, I can see this screen, yeah.
Yep. So that's about joining those things together. So part of that is to reflect pressures and placements. So those 3 numbers are referenced further up the table. They add up to 8.2 million, and we've built in further placement pressures of 7 million. So in total, we're adding in a total of 15.2 million pounds of additional budget placements. So that helps deal with the in-year budget gap we've got. So that we're reporting a pressure just now in a range of things, which all includes considering where we are in terms of placements, which will keep up to date across the year and keep refreshing. So we'll do a further refresh as part of the MTFS at period 8 to feed that into the final budget report. But also it reflects assumptions about inflation uplifts for next year, but also a range of other demand pressures in terms of projecting number of older adults we might have in the system, number of younger adults, and number of transitions.
okay, I'm going to ask for some clarification on that. Sorry. Okay, sorry, Councillor Sneddon, do you want to come
Yeah,
back?
I just want, I mean, you'll want your clarification. I'm certain I won't answer that. So I'll answer it, but I just wanted to, I suppose, reassure the committee as well around the process and how we worked, because we've had lots of conversations in the past about forecasting and anticipating need. And we've talked about what I think is really obvious, and we've talked about why it's difficult and etc. But I just wanted to share, I suppose, a bit of insight into certainly what we've done this year. And this year, what was presented to me was a graph, and the graph had a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. And Neil will correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is the figures you have in front of you are the middle way. I think it's just important to give you that insight, because we've wanted to have that conversation about how you arrive at those figures. And so I think it's fair to say these are not the worst case, what we think the worst case scenario is, somewhere in the middle. I hope that's helpful, Chair.
Yes, thank you. That is actually, because I was going to ask about modelling later, but so I just want to be really clear, sorry, Neil, with you, just because I'm just trying to do the maths as you're talking, and I'm just trying to work out. So we've got the previously approved pressures and savings, and you said those first 3, and you said about 30 million there. Now I'm understanding that's a total over the whole MTFS.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. Okay, and then you're talking about the total. So are you, when you say about new pressures and that we're adding in, are you saying, well, we're adding the 10 million into that first 26-27? Because obviously the 10 million is going to be recurring, isn't it? And then built into the budget.
That's correct. So we've got the 3 numbers at the top, which is 8.2 million, plus the 7 million pound on a recurring basis.
With the 8.2 million at the top.
So if you take the total of those 3 lines, there's 2.8,
right,
4.5, and the 9,000 is 8.2 million.
Yeah.
That's built in, and then you add a further 7 million to that, and gets you your 15.2 million. So that's added on a recurring basis.
Okay, so you're not adding in the adult social care staffing cost pressure on a recurring basis.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about placements is what our big challenges now. So the staffing cost pressure is a different issue, and I think maybe something Joe wants to talk about separately. But in terms of placements and placement modelling, assumption of placements is explained. It's about modelling. We built a model, and because we've been, as you can see, we've had significant challenges about how do we arrive at the best set assumptions to indicate future pressures. we've changed the approach to try and think about best case, worst case, and the sort of middle, or most likely case, and we're keeping that refreshed. So we built a model which is based around about June. We refreshed it in August, and we'll refresh it again in November. So it's up to date. So it's taking account of what we see things are going forward. It takes account of understanding of London living wage. So just now we've built 4% in terms of inflation in. We know the London living wage is over 6% increase. So we're then considering how this year's experience, because we built in 6.4 million to the budget this year inflation, and we're still negotiating and navigating our way through with providers sitting and agreeing those uplifts. But it kind of feels like we may not spend 6.4 million this year, because not every provider is asking for it, because they've already got a bit of surplus in their accounts.
Okay.
So there's a number of things we have to think about. Well, what number do we go for? Because worst case, if you added another million to the inflation factor, I think to the calculation, I should have written it down somewhere, is around about 4 million or so in terms of cost we'd have to find or add as pressures.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's all for me. I think Kathy has, so Councillor Brennan has got one more.
I did have one more question. Councillor Connor will correct me if I'm putting it in the wrong section. This was the question about continued savings. What was it called on the piece of paper? We've got a way of naming it. Agreed savings.
Previous agreed pressures, and these are the pressures and these are the savings.
Yeah, I think it was agreed. Was it agreed pressures that I was talking about? Agreed savings.
Pressures, you were.
Okay, I was talking about agreed pressures then. Agreed pressures. And I understand that these are sort of arranged, they're worked out over the medium-term forecast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then they're put into the budget in advance. And then I had a question saying, are these adjusted once we find out in year whether those figures are correct? Do we adjust the rest of the medium-term forecast once we've seen how it has worked this year? Or do we leave our forecast, the medium-term forecast or medium-term pressure that we put in the budget at the beginning of the 5 years, we just leave it just as it is, even though we are well aware that in any particular year, we were out in our ideas what the pressures would be?
Yeah.
So take adult social care as an example. In calculating the 7 million we've added in, what we've done is taken what previously was approved and the current position. So we've looked at the overall picture in terms of the funding needed to support placements, what we've built in previously in terms of assumptions, and any adjustment. So in the case of adult social care, because we're dealing with demand and cost pressures, we've had to build in a further 7 million on top of what we thought we needed 12 months ago.
So that's another figure that's been added in?
Yes, it has.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. So we've gone back and looked at it, and we think now we need an additional 7 million to address the financial gap we've got. That tends to be the approach right across the council. We're looking at the position now and updating all our forecasts to ensure that for the coming next year, we've got sufficient budget. So, but that also takes account of any savings and anything else we're doing as well. So it's that all those moving parts are kind of brought together.
Yeah, but in terms of recording the way you write the figures down, you record it underneath as a separate thing. You keep on the budget line, you keep what you've thought the pressures were, and then you add in an extra figure because you know that actually, or you think that the pressures were wrong previously. And so presumably that figure is presumably altered as time goes on, is it?
Well, it is, because we built 7
7
million
now,
next
it
year.
still might not be
But when
right.
we come to set the budget for 27, 28, we'll then look at the in-year position for 26, 27, and then decide whether we need to add more.
Yeah, exactly.
So we keep it.
Right, we're going to need to move on because we've got lots of questions. So, your questions, please.
Okay. Part of it talks about that there's some of the new proposals are relatively low, but the council's committed to overall to deliver nearly £34 million of savings. And it talks about this is between now and April 26, and it talks about clear plans and strategy to unblock any perceived barriers, and also possibly making decisions to reallocate resources from other activity. I suppose in terms of adult social care, what are the perceived blockages, and are you proposing to reallocate resources to?
So what page are you on, Councillor Donovan?
Page 41.
41, brilliant, thank you.
So I think in terms of blockages, one of our blockages that somebody referred to earlier is around capacity and staffing. So some of the savings, as we will go on to discuss, sit within commissioning, which tends to be the powerhouse of savings within adult social care service, obviously, because frontline workers are delivering frontline. Come back to that. And we've had a very lean team here for quite a long while, and were successful in securing money early in the financial year to recruit to that team. We were slightly derailed, well, that's the understatement. We were derailed by NRS, the equipment service going under, and the time that we thought we'd be recruiting into was actually just totally dominated for 3 months. 3 months. So we're now doing that recruitment now. So that it's not it's certainly not a blocker, but it is a barrier. A barrier to addressing the savings is definitely capacity. And not just within commissioning. We also are recruiting from the investment in the team more widely, peripatetic social worker, and that's a model that I'm hoping to roll out going forward. So there'll be people that will be more agile to help us with savings, to be blunt. So whether they're needed to undertake a group of reviews, for instance, for residents that are currently out of borough, in order that we can look at developing more local provision. Just that responsiveness, that pace that has been an issue in the past. Similarly, in terms of mental health and section 117, which is another really tricky area, we're recruiting a forensic mental health social worker to give us capacity that a lot of authorities have that role, or at least one of them, that can do the intensive work with some of our more complex residents, working with the trust and with other voluntary community sector partners to ensure that we can develop pathways for that group of residents, but also to make sure that 117 arrangements are aftercare looks right for them, and that we're paying what we should be paying and not what the NHS should be funding. So I would say one of the biggest barriers has been around staffing and capacity, definitely. And I think linked to that is when an organisation this size has gone through so much change, we've got to carefully manage our need, my desire for us to be very much a corporate service, working with all our enabling services, HR, finance, clearly, children's services, all the services, but at the same time to protect our interests and the savings and improvements that we need to make. So I wouldn't say that it's a barrier, but there's always a risk associated with huge organisational change and transformation, that you end up spreading yourself so thinly that you can't focus in on the areas that you need to address and are well and truly at your door. So that's something we manage every day, but it is quite a challenge. I think I won't go on too much, Councillor Donovan, but I think another massive one is we are going through change when everybody else is going through change. So you have the Integrated Care Board. I think one of our biggest risks in terms of change management is actually with the Mental Health Trust, who are going through formidable change, and it is becoming very difficult to navigate with them for some of our most complex and vulnerable residents. And I think in terms of barriers, when people go through change, what they tend to do is they deal with the things that are most manageable and park the issues that are really tricky, because, hey, we'll get to it. So section 117, Trying to get solutions around funding is quite tricky. CHC is trickier than it ever has been in my career. Trying to get funding arrangements in place, which for us is a massive barrier in terms of savings, because some of our lowest hanging fruit sits in that space. There are many, many more, but I think that's a good start for 10.
Yeah, Councillor Smith?
Yeah, I thought I'd add to that only because it just popped into my mind because it's super current. Some of you would have seen that this year. It's been a long year. This week, sometimes weeks can feel like years, can't they? Just this week, there was a report in the HSJ, which I think is a really good example of the kind of blockers and challenges. We don't really can't actually unlock much, but there are challenges that HSJ is reporting that integrated care boards are going to cut better care fund. And you will all know that in other contexts we've had that conversation about the role of better care fund. Better care fund is there to act and sit across social care and health. And so implications, and you can see. So, and I feel like it's not uncommon for there to be an announcement like that every week that makes us think, oh, what? And I'm not sure how we unlock that block. And it's a bigger conversation there, but and who knows what that's going to look like in practice when it comes out of the sausage machine. But I think that's a really good example of how we're needing to sort of marshal our minds all the time and change. So even, hopefully our modelling is better this year, but even so, there are so many other shifting sands around us. I think it's really difficult, and it is a sign of multiple systems under deep pressure. And I think what I think about what some of the answers are to that.
Okay, so unless it's urgent, because we've got about 90 questions tonight, so midnight is I'm just sort of thinking we're going to be a little bit more. That's Donovan, was there anything you want to ask on the follow-up, because that was your question?
Really, just to say that it's really important that we are looking at those 5 years, at least 5 years, 26 to 31, and also when we are looking at savings, I think all of us around the table realise that sometimes savings are important, but also investing to save is important, and cutting something this year, which I know the professionals aren't likely to do, which then means that things become much more expensive in future years, something that we always try to avoid. So a lot of the stuff that you are talking about, we may be looking at maybe 29, 30, or even later on, where the investment not only we're making in other people, but the residents as well, will actually save money in the future. So it is really useful that we are looking at these 5 or 10 year forward, and we're not just, it is quite frightening, the sort of the 34 million pounds, etc. But we also need to look forward, as I'm sure you are doing at future years.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just maybe I'll start off with a quick one, Neil, just some clarification. The forecast annual EFS interest charge, is that amount paid just purely for the interest on the capital that we're borrowing? Page 43. We went through this earlier. I just want some clarification. Does that pay just the interest, or does it pay the capital? Would we reduce the amount?
That's just the interest charge.
So the capital keeps growing. The amount that we have.
The loan keeps growing.
The loan keeps growing, right? The EFS amount keeps growing. We're just paying the interest on the growth.
I think I wasn't wanted to craft these charts, but this is to illustrate the interest charged on that level of exceptional financial support. There will be assumptions built to the MRP in terms of repayment of any debt. So elsewhere in the report will cover any provisions around MRP in terms of capital.
Will we be able to get some clarification? Because the amount grows all the time. I just want to know that,
I agree. I couldn't find it in the report, so I think that's good.
Okay, thank you. So my next question, sorry,
No.
you wanted to say?
No.
Yeah.
It was a different question.
Yeah. So my next question is along the lines of what Councillor Brennan asked earlier. The new pressures. So this is page 45. So on the new pressures that we are considering going forward over the next 5 years, it seems to me that you have taken a view that the pressures for years 27, 28, 28, 29, and 29, 30 would be fairly similar, which is half the amount that you are, that is half the amount that you're considering for 26, 27 for the following year. I just want to understand the assumptions made. Why have you taken that position? Then clearly 20, 30, 31, you've gone back and doubled the pressure. So I'm trying to understand the rationale for that.
Yeah, probably I can't comment on the council overall position because in terms of adult social care.
Okay. So what about just adult social care?
Well,
So
adult social
assumption.
Adult social care has part of why it's so large this year is to reflect what we assumed required when we prepared the budget last year, plus account for the gap we've got this year. So we're trying to hopefully at long last get the adult social care placement budget at a level is sustainable and realistic, hopefully, based on the modelling we have. So that's why we made assumptions that when you look at new pressures of 30 million and the previously agreed pressures of 46 million, in the following year you've got then, as you've highlighted, almost a halving of the new pressures. So in fact, we're building in only effectively 56 million or 57 million pounds of pressures. That kind of reflects the fact is in adult social care, this use that example is this year we would only we're asking for an additional 7 million next year.
Yeah.
On top of the 8.2 million we've already asked for.
Yes.
Because that's getting us to a level where we believe is sustainable.
Yeah.
So then going forward, if that's the right level, then we're asking a small increase to deal with increase in demand for older adults, deal with complexity, and deal with things we know about transitions in terms of numbers coming through.
So I do get that, but the assumption you're making then is your growth, your demand flatlines afterwards. And I'm just not certain if you can make that assumption, given that you have come to us and told us that although you're starting to manage the costs, you're not necessarily in control of the demand.
Bear in mind, this is not flatlined, it's adding in an additional every year.
It's just the trajectory is not like this, it's slightly lower, right?
Yeah, so we're adding in 15.2 million pound next year, then a further 7.2 million pounds into adults the following year. On top of that, 15.2. Then on top of that again, we're adding a further 7.2 million. So it keeps stepping up. So it's not flatlining, and we're actually keep adding more in to reflect the fact we expect.
You're adding the same amount every year.
We're keep adding on, yeah.
And so next year's about it's the base. It's that leap of the base budget.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that then the base budget is starting at a higher point.
At a higher.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah.
So in effect, this year we've got largely about 140 million pound placement budget.
Yeah.
So if we add 15 million to that, we've got next year when it's 26, 155 million. In the following year, if we add another 7 million to that, we've got then 162 million. So it keeps building up because we're reflecting those things about inflation and those increased numbers that we're seeing all the time in terms of.
Because I think it's a really important discussion. So I think the other bit of the jigsaw is about demand management, isn't it? And I think it's really hard in a budget like social care, to be blunt. It is. I mean, Neil's team have done a fantastic amount of work in this space, and it's really helping us enormously get a sense of what we need to do to better manage demand.
Yeah.
So I think we know that we've not been digitally in a strong space as a service, and though that won't suit everybody to have some, you know, digital response at our new front door. It will help us better signpost residents to the kind of care and support that they need, which is not always us. Genuinely, often people come to social care because they don't really know what we do. That is just in my experience, particularly people of my age and older, because they maybe have a view that we have 4,000 social workers and they'll get a social worker if they contact us. There's still a lot of people genuinely believe that. So we've a lot to do about communication, people understanding what we do, having a much more effective communication in and out of the service. And I think the other bit is really about, we were talking earlier, Councillor Dasneves and I, about information, advice and guidance with that wide network of services and support around IAG, and to make sure that at the earliest opportunity people get signposted to the right support, so don't need to come to social care. There will always be demand for our services, always, but I think at the minute, as we know from various discussions we've had with members, that at least half of the demand at the front door doesn't translate into Care Act assessments. I mean, that's huge. And I think if we manage that and grip that carefully, we'll get the right residents to support their needs, and the rest of our residents will be signposted to support that best meets their needs. So that will impact the budget, but not immediately.
One last question. So maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this because it's quite an important one to do maybe later on. I think my final question leads on from what you've just said here, that you've clearly articulated it's very difficult to manage the demand. We can only take a view or a model to take the best view. So my concern then is how else will you control your budget? It then comes to cost controls, right? My concern is that if we are then banking a lot on cost controls, would that impact negatively on the service that we provide our residents? So, for example, when we come to commission, would we then look, instead of, would we put value for money and costs maybe as a priority over the quality of the service? So, I mean, I'm asking for, I don't know is the answer. I'm asking for reassurance whether actually we would do that, which then means there is an impact on residents and potentially a negative impact later on.
Yeah, I want to come in on that, and I'll bring Joe in. I think the statutory duty doesn't change. You know, undoubtedly, we know that if we think about residential care, and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, there are some very expensive and you might use a bit fancy facilities out there, and they're not facilities we use. That's the reality. We know some residents don't love that. They would like to choose those facilities. So that, but part of that speaks to the next bit that I was point I was going to make, which is part of, I think there are other ways to control costs that are not here that you mentioned.
Yes.
And one of the big ways is that we could have reform of adult social care, and that's not going to happen in the coming year, that's for sure. I wish it was, but I think in coming years, we know that even governments acknowledge that, even though they haven't moved quickly on reform, have acknowledged that the system is fundamentally broken, and there could be future models that I think would deliver better value and enable us to control costs and deliver better services. So I think we'd also be looking for that in the medium term, not the short term, but our medium term, I think, needs to aspire to some kind of social care reform, because undoubtedly status quo is unsustainable. It's unsustainable for us. It's unsustainable for every other local authority in the country. And you've heard me say it before, but I think ADAS have said, I think most adult social care directors come out this year and said they don't think they're going to meet their budget, and certainly not going to meet next year's either. So, and that's a reflection of a system that doesn't work. And so we need a whole root and branch look at how that functions and how we procure, if that's the right word, or how we provide is maybe a better word, the services that people need. So I think I would expect that in the medium term we would be looking for those answers, because I don't think you're right that about one thing, which is that those two answers aren't enough to deliver a secure future. And so I hope that the KC review will look at the sustainability. And there's been lots of talk about the National Care Service. I think that's a whole string to the bow, and within that there are whole discussions about for-profit, not-for-profit, community versus residential, and different models even within that. And there are other countries and even different bits of the country who are trying things. I think that's a really important other option. But Jo, I don't know if you've got anything.
Yeah, I mean, I would, not to be like a broken record, but I would just restate that the thing about demand-led budgets, you can't control demand, but you can manage demand. And I think that's the bit that we can get massively better at in terms of bringing down that budget. But back to your question, I am 100% of the view that services can be delivered more efficiently. So just as an example, in my last authority, we did a review of day services, which we're doing here in Haringey too. And we changed a very old-fashioned service, which wasn't basket weaving, but wasn't far off, with people with learning disabilities. We co-produced it with the residents, and we moved to, a bit of a nightmare to be honest, but we moved to a model where it was almost like an adult and community learning provision. So it operated almost like a mini college. And residents, it was provided service, so no one had to use a direct payment or a care package, it was provided. And residents came along for sessions that they wanted to access. So it could have been music, singing, something, Jo, cooking, computer skills. It's just fabulous. Some residents clearly wanted to come all day, because some people want to be at a day service all day, and they were eligible to be there all day if that's they wanted, what they wanted. But it was not massively cheaper, but quite a lot cheaper, and it was infinitely better for promoting the independence and visibility of residents with learning disabilities. So I think we sort of need to be careful and sensitive to the fact that offering something for less doesn't mean that the quality necessarily drops, nor that it's not more relevant and actually better. Particularly when they're co-produced with residents and you're very clear about what their needs are. No. Did you want to add anything there to that?
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to go to Councillor Pope if you've got any questions. I just wanted to ask a follow-up question, actually, sorry, on something that Councillor Ingham pointed out. So Neil, I hear what you're saying, that you're not here to talk to the full MTFS, but it is very clear on table 6 on the budget gap on page 45, and this is, I think, what you were sort of alluding to, that the pressures that if it continues, you know, and that's adding the £7 million, I think, in adults that you were at before. I noted the total gap was £190 million, which, and I think at 13.6, you know, that's an enormous figure. You know, it's just something that we can't probably even get our heads around. But I did note what it said, that we've got to move away from the traditional salami slicing across all budgets, and not everything may be affordable. Council's limited financial resources will need to continue to be prioritised, the most vulnerable, and sets it out as the corporate delivery plan. It may mean spending more in areas of greater need and significant reductions in other areas. So in adults and health, have you, I know, you know, we look at places where, and I think you've just highlighted a really good area of how you can spend less but achieve more. But it's that whole thing about invest to save. And I noted within the report, we'll get onto it, there wasn't anything in this year's or 26-27's around invest to save. So it's, I suppose it's the challenge from us is to, we're looking at it from a financial perspective, with that sort of figure looming across the whole of the council, within adults and health, which is one of the biggest overspending areas, what's actually going on in order to look at what we can do in that area, so that we are forward thinking about how we put those models in place, so that we can make those savings but not reduce the quality that Councillor Haran was talking to. So I was looking at Joe, looking at Neil, but actually Joe might sort of be wanting to come in on that.
Did you want to come in?
Yeah, could I come in first?
Yeah.
Chair?
That's-
So I think, and I haven't got exactly the wording right in front of me in the place, but I think what that's referencing is also the fact that I'm not sure there is, I mean, Joe's talked about we can be more efficient and effective, and I'll come into part 2 of my answer. But I think part of my answer is there isn't a huge amount more that we can do within adults. So I don't know that we're necessarily looking at adults as being that space if we were having a conversation about if we needed to arrive at more savings. I'm not sure there's a hell of a lot more in adults that we could do, although I think every year we'll look at that and everywhere we'll learn from what others are doing as well. I think that's, now I've forgotten my second point, which is rather annoying. If I look at you, it will come back to me.
Usually inspire people in that way, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
That's all right.
It might
Joe,
occur to me,
you
perhaps Joe could
come
come
back.
in. Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah, we are investing to save. I mean, the staffing is.
It's come back to me.
Do you want to
Yeah.
finish your bit?
Yeah, which I think it's to say, and Joe, you can correct me if you think this is wrong, but I think there are always possibilities with Invest to Save, and there is some in there this year, and there's some in there which is about existing, previous savings that we've committed to, and there are some in there for this year, and I think it might not feel that ambitious, but given that we've got the task also of delivering on improvement, and we have to be sensible and careful about those commitments that we're making to residents. And I'd reiterate again, my hope is that we might be able to be a little bit more ambitious as well with Invest to Save when we've got a sense of what those national themes might come about, because I think there'll need to be some different ways of delivering service. And at that point, if we're further on our improvement journey as well, we'll be in a more secure place. But there are Invest to Save, but they're not that kind of, I understand they don't stand out in that sort of way. We've talked before in the past about how we've invested in CHC. It feels a bit difficult. So can Invest to Save almost to stand still just to do better on something, but they are really important. But anyway, Joe, I think you wanted to come in.
No. That's brilliant segue. I mean, I think the staffing's critical because to get the pace that we need on a few areas, we need staff. So the commissioning team I mentioned before, and one of the commissions I think I mentioned to you, Councillor, in the past, we need to have someone leading on transition in commissioning and work with children. So we've got commissioners working across both areas to look at supported housing, employment, all the pieces you're well aware of. CHC is massive, and you know that last year we were really successful in that space. So this year, again, as part of our staffing arrangements, we're going to have a small team with the intention to grow the capacity of the whole service in that space. It's a really hard space to be in CHC. It's quite brutal. You've got to be borderline confrontational to be in those negotiations, bluntly. And we're very lucky to have a couple of new staff, and I've worked with previously, who are very strong in that space. So I think we need to grip there because it will bring in some money. So we've invested there. Carers is another one. So whilst we've still got the Better Care Fund and this transition year, Councillor Desnos was saying that's looking precarious going forward, but we are investing there because we know going out on our carer strategy, reputationally, practically, operationally, and because it's the right thing to do, we need to deliver on carers reviews, and the relationship with carers will be critical for us always. So some of the staff investment will be there. We're going to talk on Councillor Brennan's point later about age debt and charges. Digital's another one. It's not an investment we've made, but the council has made a great investment in that area. And we're the priority service, we're the priority service for investment in digital. So that could be digital for our staff at front line in undertaking assessments and reviews. It could be, as you know, a more digital response at front door, but that will make us infinitely more effective. You know that we were lucky to get investment in 3110, who, you know, have done some great work with us. They're reviewing all our panel arrangements. So where financial decisions are broken and made, they're reviewing the effectiveness of our panel arrangements. They're also doing some work on section 117 because mental health's risky, and we'll speak later, I think, councillors, about reablement, supported living, etc. And I think the last one I would say is we need to make decisions going forward about whether we invest in reviews so that we can catch up on any backlogs that we might have in that space. The challenge there, of course, if you invest in reviews, your care budget goes up. Yeah. So it needs to be very well managed. It's a real art, and it needs to be done on a risk basis, and it needs to align to the signposting piece that I mentioned earlier. So we've actually had, I think, as a council, as a service, a huge amount of invest to save, actually, and I think that it takes a real skill for someone like Taryn to know to pragmatically, using evidence, to arrive at those decisions, to know that you don't get anywhere making the savings we've got to make unless you do that, we make that investment. Yes.
Thank you. So because of time, and we've got quite a lot left to do, so we've gone through the sort of main budget papers, the cabinet papers around the medium-term financial strategy. So I'm just asking, before we make some quick recommendations on that we've just been discussing, and we move on to the savings, is there any other questions that anyone has just on the MTFS? Yes, if it's on the MTFS.
Well, it was on something that Joe said, and I'm assuming it's on topic, which was when you're talking about savings that we can do on commissioning and procurement. Now, I know that within the council, we're doing a lot of work in trying to tighten up systems on procurement and commissioning, and particularly on keeping track of them on that sort of thing. I was just wondering how far along is adults health and social care, would you say, in terms of that programme? I mean, because like you said, you know, you're at the top, at the front when it comes to digital.
Being prioritised is what.
Yes, you're being prioritised. Yeah. How prioritised are you being in terms of being helped to tighten up procurement to become more modernised? It's very difficult to actually really tighten up and save a lot of money on commissioning procurement.
Absolutely. So maybe Councillor Dasnev and Neil might want to chip in as well. So I think I chair our own commissioning board in adult social care as DAS. You know, it's really important that I have that grip and give assurance to the corporate centre, because the work on commissioning is largely being led by Caroline Brain in Children's Services, working with Barry in procurement, and obviously the procurement legislation has meant as you rightly say, Council, we've had to really tighten up. We're absolutely compliant as a service. I live and breathe compliance. I do think, however, when our leadership team, we're getting a deputy DAS to work directly to me, who have oversight of the operational teams to ensure we get the improvements in operational activity on the ground. It will give me capacity to stretch with my colleague Neil into that corporate space, because I think Sarah has represented us there, but we need stronger representation at that corporate space. It's another piece of governance that we I wouldn't say we need to strengthen, we just need representation there. But our own commissioning board absolutely feeds into that group, and we have corporate commissioning colleagues on our board, and finance, and everyone else that you'd expect to be on a commissioning board within adult social. I don't know what the direction of travel will be around commissioning, but you know, we will move to be compliant and do whatever we need to do as a service to ensure we're delivering what we need to be doing.
I think, sorry, but I think that I read in the audit committees from that it was one of the things that the outside auditors raised was procurement commissioning in adult social care as a note of concern. In fact, I mean, my interest is simply how much money we're going to, how much more money we can save. I believe that value for money automatically assumes that you're getting value, so therefore you're getting a good service as well as maybe not costing as much. I don't think the value for money means doing. I mean, I think it's getting a good service, but possibly not paying so much money. And I'm just interested in how much less money we will need to spend if somehow we work on procurement and get a good service for less. So that's what I'm interested in.
If I could come in, and Joe might want to come in on that last point in audit. I think the only thing I'd say, and I don't want to sound overly defensive, is that quite a lot of what we pay for in adult social care isn't determined by any activity that we might do within our own sphere and our own control from a procurement point of view. It's actually led by a sort of market management approach and by what's happening in the market, in the care market around us. I think you know that. And so some of the things that we've done, I think, have been really good. I look at how we can, instead of spot purchasing placements, but block pay for home care placements, etc. But what we're paying, you know, that's in a way where we're in a kind of an arrangement with all the other boroughs in NCL. So it's not that I think there isn't anything more we can do with procurement, except, and I think Joe will come in a little bit on some of the audit commission. I think that I actually think that we're just limited in the amount of levers that we have in that from that point of view, which comes back to some of those earlier points. But Joe, did you want to come in on?
Yeah, I was just checking that if I could cross-reference Councillor Brennan's comments on audit. I think you might be referring to KPMG. Yeah,
It was.
Thank you. Yeah, we met with them again yesterday. Yeah, I mean, I think there's often a view. Okay, I won't be defensive either. I think we've got a small commissioning team, and Councillor Dustnebs is spot on. It is market management within social care. I've worked within children's as well, and within commissioning too. It is infinitely more complex and more demanding. So I hope Neil would agree that we are very much working to be part of, you know, this whole compliant new world of procurement, which is adding many, many extra layers of bureaucracy for all of us, but some of them are very necessary, suffice to say. I think Neil and I had the discussion when I first started about strategic commissioning. And I hope I wasn't defensive back in the day, Neil, but you can only look at strategic commissioning if you've got enough operational commissioners to actually fulfill the work that they need to be doing to give us assurance of the quality and safety and provision and value for money provision on the ground. I think we've lacked a bit of capacity there, and I'm so very happy that we're going to get that capacity. I can't see what KPMG said, Councillor Brennan, but I'll have a look and I'll maybe come back to you on that.
I have a feeling that they might be referring to something that I think we're doing, which is bringing, you know, when you're paying a lot of money, paying out of borough and caring for more people in borough. I think that's part of what they're thinking of. I think we are working at that definitely, but there might be.
Yeah, there was. It was a part of the audit report went to audit committee on Monday, I think, from recollection. So there was a reference to the daycare placements out of borough.
Yes. Right. Oh, thank you, Neil. Thank you, Councillor Brennan, for being on top of that one. So daycare out of borough is always really expensive. It's mostly really expensive because you often end up paying for transport. So in 2025, it's massively excessive. There are fewer people in that marketplace. So if you go out to procurement, you often get, I think I've said this here before, 1 or 2 people. Back in the day when I was young, you get 10 or 15 providers. interested. It's a very, very expensive area of our business across the council. So yes, daycare out of borough is something that we are all over. Yeah.
Just to give a reassurance, there is a commissioning modernisation programme that led by Tara. It's so she's leading that whole process to I think elevate our commissioning approach across the council. So it's not just adult social care, it's children's social care, what's happened to the housing demand. So it's right across the council. So it's to try and improve our whole strategic direction and quality and standards around commissioning. So I think that's important that we recognise that's underway.
And just to reassure the committee and chair, it's something we could come back to in future if the committee were interested in it. I've met with Taryn because I think there are more broadly there are just different ways that you can look at innovation. I think, and whilst I sort of agree there are lots more rules. Actually, I think quite sometimes in procurement we also there are new and different ways to look at how we commission. I know in health that there's a lot more discussion about alliance commissioning, ways that we combine things together, but also the way that we perhaps commission locally and commission local organisations. Government set out a bit of a preference for working with local organisations, but that takes a different kind of way of working because some organisations are not ready to be commissioned now. It doesn't mean they're not capable of delivering something really good. You have to work in a really different kind of way. So just to reassure the committee, those are the kind of conversation. Certainly when I've met Taryn on this topic. I'm really happy to be really interested in it. I think especially if we talk about neighbourhoods and we talk about working in partnership with health, those are the kind of things we need to think is how can we enable, and if organisations locally aren't ready to deliver but could be good, how can we help them within the rules of procurement to be ready? That makes a lot more sense and that helps our local economy and keeps us close to the services. Otherwise it is tempting to buy off the shelf from a larger organisation because it seems safer and it's easier and they know what to do. But in the long term, there might be better outcomes working with smaller, more local organisations. But it takes a different way of thinking, it takes a different kind of infrastructure, right?
Okay, thank you. So we do need to move on to the savings bit. So I'm going to just. You can, because this is the recommendation bit on the bit we've just discussed. So actually that is a good moment, Joe, for you to do that. So I'll just make some come with some recommendations that I've heard from members here on this section, and then we'll move more onto the other section around the savings. So I think we've noted as a committee, particularly today around page 45 in the budget gap, we've noted the risk of £192 million and the risk within that in the adult social care budget. And I think we've also noted that there's a risk in 13.6 around maybe spending more in some areas of greater need and priority and more significant reduction in others. So I suppose the recommendation from that is just going forward, we have a clearer understanding coming forward as to what if that is going to be within adult social care itself, and if so, what would that entail? What would that look like? The second one that I've heard to say is around the cuts to the Better Care Fund. There's a risk in that for us as a council and in adult social care provision, and it's really understanding of what that is going to mean for our residents. So that would be really helpful to have that in the future when that understanding is with us. There's also around the digital provision, and I've completely heard about this like almost invest to save within, and Joe, you've been very eloquent about what that's going to help with in assessment reviews, front door, and you've mentioned quite a number of other things. Councillors around the table will have sat here and listened to digital solutions before over many years, and the issues that we have is sometimes we are told that it's all going to work, and sometimes it hasn't in quite the way. So that I think for us there's a risk within that, in the way that we are hoping that is going to help and improve things. So I suppose recommendations around, we note that that's a risk, although it looks like a really good option, there is a risk within that, and actually what is being done in the background if that digital solution doesn't come into play. We've also heard around the providers were concerns around providers, concerns around increased costs within the provider sector. That's a risk to the budget in adult social care. We've heard about the mental health team and Section 117, and we've also heard about the CHC and really understanding how we're going to continue to support our residents within that, but also the risk if providers' costs become too high and it's more, it really does impact on our budget. So it's around the modelling that you were talking about earlier, and it's really for us to understand. Going back to Councillor Brennan's thing, I did remember what she was saying about the summary of risk assessment. I think it was on page 43 of the audit report, the KPMG report. And there's a risk in here around risk 6. The council does not have adequate process in place to ensure the social care spend is sufficiently forecast to manage, or that financial contribution patients will come to later, but also risk 3 about the adequate procurement process in place. So I think really we were talking about commissioning and procurement earlier, and really so one of the recommendations is really for us to understand as a committee how that procurement process is working as tightly as it possibly can, that works, that, within the audit section, but also within adults, within our area of scrutiny as well in budget. So we've understood how that is progressing and how that is being strengthened across the piece. Is there anything else within the main pack? And I think we just note that there is the overspend of 57 million coming for 26-27. And that's it just seems, going back 3 or 4 years, Councillor Snowes, we can sit here and think, I can't imagine us ever saying that, because we always came in on budget, and actually with this loan, I think for us, the risk is around the interest rates on the loan, the 6% on that. I think we've looked at that in the tables today, and it's really understanding how as a council we can survive in this climate where we are being asked to provide so much with so little money, and we are so significantly, having to take these huge loans out. So those are the recommendations around just understanding how we are pushing forward. I know there's been lots of work going on in the background. If we can come back to that at the end, that'd be great, because but I knew there's been a lot of work, but it's just really how we sort of work out how we're going to survive in a councils with those sorts of increases. I think page 43 really does sort of spell it out incredibly clearly about the cumulative EFS, and it does make you sort of draw breath and think, okay, this is huge. So I think it's just that recommendation that we've noted that as a huge, loan that we're currently needing to take out, and actually how we can possibly bring that back in a way that we can function effectively going forward. So that's going to be it on the medium-term financial strategy. I'm sure Neil will be pleased that we have tried to keep it to adults as much as possible. I just want us to look at the agreed savings on this section, the previously agreed pressures and savings, just to check that, because we did ask for that as a committee last time. We have been provided it. So it's just really the questions here around, these were previously agreed savings. A quick ask to Joe really is around, within these savings proposals, the last year's savings are mainly on green, I noted. My understanding is that the savings are on track and you haven't got any concerns, is that correct?
It is, yeah. Yeah, it is. I think what we've agreed to do internally is any areas that become a concern, then we will reprofile them. We know we need to bring home savings to the council.
Right.
And I can give a detailed update on anyone particularly interested.
So we've got these, which is agreed savings. It starts, well, I suppose it's transitions, just so everyone notes, and then it goes down to not the housing, ignore housing. So day opportunities. So is there anything within this, Joe, that you're looking at? Because I don't know within resettlement how much of that 300,000 is something that, is that part of like a £3 million agreed saving before, and this is just a small part that you're just finishing off at this point. So you've got it on.
Do you want to say something about the resettlement line, Neil?
Yeah, it's just a budget adjustment. So previously we used some funding. We used 150,000 each year for 24, 25 and 25, 26. So we're effectively taking it back out of the budget in effect. So if you look back at the budget adjustments, you've seen a minus 150 and a minus 150 in the 24, 25 budget, 25, 26 budgets.
Right.
26, 27, we're just moving that out because it was basically using the settlement funding to actually repurpose it to support adults. Yeah.
Okay.
Similarly, at the bottom of the page, the resettlement funding at 416,000 of a similar thing. So we're using some resettlement funding to support adult social care. So that would have appeared as a budget support, but it's now getting removed from the budget in effect.
Okay, I mean, I've got the previous, quarter one, and these are all green on track, and then there's a couple of ambers.
Yeah.
There's only one red on locality hub, but I think that we'll come to that.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that these were pretty much on track. So I'm looking at these and assuming that these are following on from this.
Yeah.
And is there anything within this that we need as a committee to ask you about? Is there something here? Because I don't know, obviously, for 26, 27. If you have picked out one, would you say day opportunities, Councillor Connell, is the one you need to look at, or are you hopeful that these figures are going to be delivered and that you're?
I'm absolutely confident about the figures being delivered. Yeah, I mean the devil is always in the detail, but what's really reassuring for me is that we've got the staffing capacity starting to be a broken record, but that will be hugely helpful for us in pretty much every area of improvement and every area of savings. And some of the ones that are here are already underway as well, so we've already got them in hand, and they're work in progress.
Yeah, Joe, is it worth saying something about provider failure? Because we've obviously we made mention earlier of NRS being quite a pressure.
Yeah.
And we know that we feel that's quite likely that we'll see other, given how broken the system is, everything's that we feel on the horizon. We do. My understanding was we did think that that might have an impact, especially on things like supported living and that side of things.
Absolutely. So, I think Neil may want to chip in here as well. So on NRS, we're actually holding a learning event as a council because it was a whole council, whole system piece. But certainly, Neil, we lived and breathed NRS for a long while. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good example, NRS, in the sense that it impacted every single team within the service and impacted every single team within the council, and we're still very much feeling the repercussions on the ground. So we're in the transition arrangements now, but I think when you experience provider failure on that scale, as Neil said early on in the silver meetings we had, it's hostage to fortunes because you don't know what people are going to start charging to provide the solution. It's difficult being a provider nowadays. Back in the day, if you ran a residential provision for young people with complex autism, speaking bluntly, there was money to be made, as well as all the other drivers as to why people did that. There was also money to be made. I would really question now that there's a lot of money to be made in care and support for adults, and hence when people do emerge post-provider failure, we've taken the new providers that are delivering on the ground now through huge amounts of checks and balances, managing, all the risks, looking at all the GDPR dimensions. Neil, obviously, all over the finance. So I think Councillor Das-Neves is right to raise it. And it's a challenge for us because we're not a rich authority, so we can't come in and say no worries. We can bolster the amount of money that others are offering you and get the gold standard. We're never in that position here, and others are. Not many, not now.
Yeah, and it does also mean that we So we might at times have to bring in addition, if we see provider failure and we're seeing that as a bit of a trend and it's a worry, it might be on some of those, we might see that we need to bring in additional resource in order to deliver some of those. And so it will mean reprofiling and saving over a longer period of time, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Because
that's
if our,
a really important point.
if our teams are really taken up by a lot of work in things that right now we're not expecting and
Yeah.
ordinarily we wouldn't.
Yeah.
But given that's what you've learned from NRS, I
Oh,
feel
yeah.
it took up a lot of time. So I think that's the challenge. I think that's the only challenge that we can anticipate. But I think it's good to be honest about that
Mm.
Yeah.
and say, actually, if our staff have to spend a lot of time dealing with something as massive and huge as that, then it means that we might have to bring in extra support to carry on doing, etc. So that might mean the savings take longer to achieve.
But I think it also adds to thinking about a wider commissioning strategy, because I think what happened with NRS was that they almost were trying to buy up contracts and the ones that wasted the lowest price. And that's not helpful in the UK market. So, and I think that's a lesson learned, that our approach to commissioning these types of activities has to be a bit of balance between price and quality, that it's not just about price, because the amount of officer time and effort across all the organisations affected by the NRS failure was huge, absolutely huge. So it's money we don't get back. So if we get the right providers and work well with us as strategic partners, then you save money.
I think that's right. And I'd make a slightly political point as well about that, which is that some of the older models for procurement might have tended us towards certain kinds of procurement, and maybe they just don't work in that modern. They just don't apply. And leaning into some of those, back to that earlier theme of some of that, how can we help local organisations work with us better? I think that could have outcomes, but it does take different thinking and not some of the more traditional models.
Thank you. Councillor Cloak.
Yeah, let's take back on the reassessment piece. I'm looking at basically the last row and the previous of investments. So it says substitution of resettlement funding, partnerships and communities. So obviously the landscape keeps on changing. And so I'm just wondering what contingencies do you have in place? Let's say you invest in a particular partnership, something goes wrong, what are the contingencies in place so that you can now easily readjust? Like this elsewhere.
That's a really good point. I was just having a discussion earlier about something similar. If I could just give it as an example. So information, advice and guidance, I know is something that you're really interested in, and there are so many people out there in that space, aren't there? And yet they don't always link in with each other. And I know we have an advice partnership, and I know CAB lead that. But it was interesting talking to Public Voice earlier today, and they were saying they're reorganising how they work with residents and how they support information, advice and guidance. And it struck me that the way to manage risk and provider failure and system failure is actually just to make sure you're really linked in with everybody that's in that space, because then you're not relying on one person. But if they have massive, if the chief executive of some organisation leaves, that organisation changes beyond recognition. So I think as a service, I want us to be very much working, it sounds woolly, but bear with me, working collaboratively with some of the key voluntary organisations, because in the past, the role of councils was very much the commissioned versus the commissioner. We held all the power. We held a lot less power because of the austerity. So I just think in simple terms, it's sink or swim. And I think on IAG, we haven't got all the answers. One of your quotes, Councillor does know. We haven't got all the answers, and we certainly haven't got all the money. So we need to link in with our voluntary community sector, our partners, and say, how can we make the system work for residents? And on information, advice and guidance, largely it's not. Some people do amazing stuff in that space, and they do really well. But there's got to be some efficiencies in how we come together so that anyone can get hold of, where do I go to if I'm fearsome about being homeless, where do I go? You shouldn't have to go around the houses to get that information. So I think one way of managing risk is just making sure you've got a bit of a rugby scrum of people that are delivering the key pieces that you need to deliver on, whatever those key pieces are. And IAG is a good example for us. It's a real hot topic for us at the moment.
Yeah, it does. And it's just, obviously there's also funding going into it. So having put some aside to say in the event this happens.
Sorry.
We've got,
Is that on resettlement specifically?
well, it's just basically on that piece because it's going to partnerships.
Yeah, so I think I don't know so much about this because I've not been so involved in it, but I do know, and Neil and Councillor Desnett, correct me if I'm wrong, that some of the work referred to here is around public health and some of the work that they did. And I think we work really very closely with public health. And they have a number of grants that they bring in, as we know, into the borough to do some excellent work. So I think this was about them supporting.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I think so. Well, I was just going to add, I think, so also what this relates to, Neil can explain how how it's financially represented, but some of our resettlement is funded by particular grant programs, and when they come to an end. So what we don't know yet is what that looks like beyond, and we're hopeful. We don't expect, although who knows, we don't expect government to think that we're not going to need to spend money. We had money for particular programs, and so at the moment we can't see sort of beyond the future. I mean, some of into the future beyond those kind of the ring fence grants for now. I mean, one of the points I was also going to make was that we've got to lean in a bit. You mentioned partnerships, and you're right. We are supporting some of our voluntary sector organisations who are really well skilled in the resettlement field. But what we need to do is keep having that, making sure that we've got the right kind of dialogue and the right support in the borough, because they can also, those organisations can also bring money into the borough to help support people. But not if we're not having the right conversations. One of the things we're going to be doing is renewing our welcome strategy in Harrogate. I'm not sort of announcing that in a public way. I don't think it's a surprise that we would do that in line with our values. And I think that will continue to help us work with some of those organisations going forward, especially in that no recourse to public funds sphere, which I think you're pointing to. Despite some of the national challenges and the national messaging, which I don't think we've made any secret about how we might feel about those in Harrogate, I think the government is going to need us to continue to work with communities in innovative ways to make sure that people have the right kind of support. And I was going to add one other thing to your question, which was that one of the things that has happened that's better is that having cycles that aren't just about a year's worth of funding, which the government's committed to. If that happens, which we're expecting it will, since they said it will really help us, because really you can't have any sort of sustainable partnership or anything when it's just a year. Actually, a year is 9 months worth of work, really maximum, because you need to kind of get, mobilise everything, get everything set up, recruit people in. And if you have 3-year funding, you can actually learn from things, work with partners, properly fund partners when you want to work with them, and also do that learning and say, okay, what would we do next to improve it, change it, etc. So that I think could be a real positive from some of the commitments the government's made to changing how they work. The end of the 1 year funding cycle.
Are there any other questions on these previously agreed pressures and savings? I was going to bring 2 very quickly in. One is on transitions. I think I read in the main report somewhere that there's a savings on this because the understanding is that the fewer people coming through, but yet we know that there's an increased pressure in our younger adults cohort. So I just was trying to work how that circle worked. because it seemed odd. There seemed like there's a strange glitch there. The other one that I was going to ask one was around, oh yes, the supported living contract. So again, so I'm not sure, is this to do with the supported living accommodation strategy? Because the question I was going to ask, and I hear what you're saying about the money, we don't have the money to come in, but we do have that joined up approach now between adults and health and housing. So my sort of scrutinizing challenge back is, okay, so within this, new sort of oversight that we have, how are we working with our housing colleagues to align the capital housing, sort of what's coming through in the pipeline, with that social care commissioning needs? So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Do you want to take transitions, Nick?
Yeah, transitions on first. So the transitions assumptions around savings and costs were built into the budget 2 years ago.
Yes.
So we did a big piece of modelling, if you recall, and a business case was assembled which looked at the cohort assumptions of the young people who would come through the system over the subsequent 5 years. So, and on the back of that, we then identified savings. So when you're looking at the growth that's coming into the budget for next year, within that growth, there's an assumption about the number of young people coming through and what they might cost.
Yep.
In this year, and this is reflecting our current progress, is that we're seeing a lower number than we first thought 2 years ago. Some of that's about better data, better information, improved modelling. So we're seeing a lower number coming through, and as a result, we're delivering savings at the number coming through, which actually is lower than the savings target. So obviously it's based on, if you've got a cohort coming through and they're going to cost £3 million, we can deliver savings at that £3 million. If the cohort's smaller and it's going to cost us £2 million, we can only deliver the smaller amount. So in this current year, what we're seeing is our cost pressures are lower in terms of the number of people coming through. It'll be cost pressures elsewhere. So the savings are lower. So that comment you had about the sort of profile reflects our current modelling. So we did a piece of work over the summer, looking at the data we have in terms of young people who are 14 plus, the age profile, the need profile, opportunity for savings, and then we basically sort of recast the numbers to understand what we might expect going forward. So that will affect the costs going to the growth, the pressures going forward. It also affect our savings profile as well. So we expect the savings profile to be at least the numbers that are in there already. So that will need to be updated going forward. So that was something that's happened post some of the discussions. So it's changing some of the profiles slightly, not massively, but it's obviously reflecting expenditure because, as you can imagine, the young people in the system, it's based on some of the needs and support needs, and that's forever changing. So
yeah,
the numbers as a whole change. So the actual quantum of children and the cost of children has changed. So that's why I think Joe mentioned earlier about that need for a specialist transition commissioner, for example, and other skilled staff to make sure that transitions function working as effectively as possible, because we know it's when there are big long-term costs, because if you're talking about an additional 3 to 4 million a year, those stay in the system for the next 30 years quite easily. So if that's happening every year, you can imagine the impact it's having on budgets.
Could I add something as well, which is you're right, Chair, to ask that question, because we do see growth in what we call younger adults, but that is a really big bracket. It's 18 to 65. Yeah. So I think we've had a conversation about how we look over that data, just different to that. I had the same questions myself. That transition cohort, as Neil says, 14, into maybe 18, 25. That bracket of people, quite different to that really big bracket of 18 to 65. Okay, which we bad as younger. Yeah. So we might be seeing, for instance, and it's a conversation we could have at a future scrutiny session in greater detail. I think if you were all interested, we could be seeing growth in what we call the younger cohort, but it could be in people in their 50s, or it could be, it could be in people between 25 and 40. So something that we could explore at a future scrutiny. Yeah, it just seemed a bit counterintuitive, but from everything that we've read in the report, and then I was like, okay, so that's fine.
Yeah, shall I cover off?
Yes.
Then? So we are working in housing because obviously we're one directorate now.
Yes.
I think there are some really great green shoots in this space and working with housing colleagues around supported living for residents with learning disabilities. This piece specifically is looking at what are essentially spot purchase arrangements for supported living. And having been in this space before in another borough, it's always more expensive when you spot purchasing. Efficiencies of block arrangements. So what it's about us looking at reviewing all the residents that are currently supported living vision. So social work capacity again. 3110 are supporting us in this space as well. They've done loads of work. They're all excellent authority people, so they're they're really good, solid, and looking at what potential opportunities there are to move to block arrangements. It's always a complex piece, supported living, because quite often, as we've been discussing recently in the service, once residents take root, they don't want to move, they want to stay. So you need to be on it all the time, growing and developing your housing opportunities for your whole range of adults that access care and support. It's like day services. Once people go to day services that they really like, they're not going to think, oh, when I'm 42, I won't bother going. They'll think I'll stay there as long as I can. That's what I would do. So you never have enough. Jack Gould from Housing came to talk to the Learning Disability Carers Forum only last week to talk about just this. We need to be doing more, both in terms of what we commission, more specialist supported living, where you might have one-to-one support whilst you live there, and maybe people with less complex needs who can live relatively independently with less support. It needs to be differentiated. It's not just one. The people we support in social care, huge and vast, and undoubtedly there's a lot more to do in this space. But similar to the day services review, it's an opportunity for us to look at opportunities for collaboration, for growing new relationships locally. But its starting point as a saving of 600k is really about moving from spot to block.
Okay, thank you. So I've asked questions on this. So my understanding, Neil, from you is that the savings that you've identified for the 26-27, the agreed savings that are coming through, my understanding is that your expectation is that these are on track and that when we do the in-year, we'll see them right. Okay. So I was going to make a recommendation or two on this, and then we'll move swiftly on to the next section. So I suppose for me, it is around that supported living and accommodation strategy. So a recommendation is that it's good to hear that, that you're moving from those spot purchasing, but it's really understanding a little bit more in more detail around how housing is working with its capital projects to align with our social care commissioning needs that we sort of obviously highlights and you work in all the time. So really it's really understanding that, so the figures, what's coming up, how many people are in that cohort, what's your projections, how housing is going to, if it is able to sort of support that. So that would be one area that I'd be really interested in. And then I suppose it's just to say it's a committee that we've scrutinised the previously approved savings, and our understanding is that these were going to be delivered, and you've got no concerns at this moment in time around the delivery of those savings. Councillor Pope, did you want to make any recommendations about the resettlement question that you had?
I've got it in hand.
Fine.
From the responses that they said, how they're going to work and how they're going to manage some of the risks.
I thought it might, but I just thought I'd just check with you because I thought you were there. Okay. Any other ones on recommendations within that area? And then the final one is around the transitions. I think it's just really to sort of understand that, and I think it's probably getting back to the who these young people are, because we've understood that they're people with much higher needs coming through at this point, and I think that's a national conversation that we're hearing. And there's a need, sort of transport special, SEND, the transport costs. So I think it was just trying to align what we hear nationally and sort of within, when we do the transition joint working with the Children's Scrutiny Committee and how we sort of work out how that's working alongside the figures that you're giving us in the papers today. So I think a little bit more information on that would be really helpful back to the committee around the numbers coming through and the costs.
Could I ask something specific about the transportation cost? Because I don't know, are we cited on that cost, or does that go to another panel?
The children's,
Or it goes to children's, okay.
well, it's interesting because, of course, you know, it's what support you get at what point, and there's a different offer in children's and adults. So yes,
I mean, this more political. No, it's both actually. I mean, obviously, there's a lot in the news recently, particularly with the issues around hotels, asylum seekers, taxis, and it's become a big issue, right, in terms of councils managing the costs and whether we're managing them appropriately in terms of transportation. Whether actually, I mean, obviously, I don't think it's this committee per se, but I think it's useful to demonstrate to the public actually that we are managing these in a responsible way. Isn't it? I don't know what you.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is I think transport here in Haringey is managed by the children's team.
Yes.
And so, I mean, Chair, you could cross-reference maybe with the children's chair actually, because I'm sure they would receive and have that conversation.
No, I mean, I'm just asking as long as it's
So I think that you're
cited somewhere.
and you're right, and I think that there's also, I think it's also been discussed when we've discussed the budget overall, etc. Certainly not remember a conversation with Councillor Connor. I don't know if you want to say anything, Jen, about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a tiny bit and maybe Neil come in too, but I think just on Councillor Connor's point. So yeah, you're entitled to different things, aren't you, until you're 18 on transport and over 18. But then there's the whole group of children that have special educational needs and disabilities that can be entitled up until their plan ceases or until they're 25, and if their plan's maintained until that time. I mean, I think, just saying it openly, I think that the issue often is about managing expectation of residents, because quite often, it's a sensitive area. If you have a child with real complex needs, the fact that they're 22 to you won't mean that they don't need to be escorted from A to B safely. But it is really worth, I mean, we work very closely with children on the transitions agenda. It's well worth us thinking out what other boroughs do around independent travel training and travel buddies and car share and all sorts of things that happen. And I think we've got the green shoots of those discussions, but we need to get to them sooner rather than later.
And I'd just add as well, doesn't play also into that transition conversation?
Yes.
Because it's quite hard when people are older and have been accustomed for a lot of their life to travel in a particular way, building skills, and it's hard for families. But if you build that into a transition process where you're developing an individual, building their skills and having a good assessment of what they're able to do, it's easier for families, because it's quite scary allowing your precious loved one to be out there and when you're unsure that they can cope. But of course, we all know that, and anyone who's a parent knows that even for a child who doesn't have additional needs, that can be scary. It's about growing that confidence for a family. Remind you, the earlier you do that, the better.
I think so. You're absolutely right. And I think a lot of parents work, and the thought of having to transport their young person, adult, from A to B is a big life-changing issue if they've got to get to work.
Right, as we were talking about, then it does relate to adults. It's part of the capital budget where it says that the children's respite facility, the capital expense for that has been won't go forward, which was going to be around 5 million, but instead there's going to be an alternative of 900k, and obviously that's a matter for the children's scrutiny. But obviously every child has a parent under stress, and this respite idea was to give that parent, because obviously it's not just the kid may have a time away, but it also gives the parent, a parent or two parents, also time to have that respite, which then will improve their well-being, etc. And I'm sort of so this 900,000 K may well help people, but obviously it won't be the same as the 5 million respite facility will be. So I don't know whether how you have any more information in relation to that, because it did appear to be something brilliant that would really improve the lives of both the children and the parents.
I'm not sure.
Which one is this one?
So this isn't a children's,
Yeah.
Okay.
because it impacts on the adults.
Yeah.
Parents. So
It doesn't, but yes, it doesn't actually relate directly
No.
to what we're discussing today. That's
But-
true. So maybe it could be something that we may look into another time.
could we ask for that to come back to the panel as a written answer, if that's all right? Because obviously you're not here to.
It will be picked up at the scrutiny panel on Tuesday with Building Services. So,
Right, we can say that it came through. from that.
which I'm also for my sin of covering as well.
Right, okay, well, there we are. It's a joined up approach here, so we could say we're sharing the questions across the piece, but
Okay.
yeah, if that could be sort of, yeah, noted from the adults. It's
Fair
really
observation, isn't it, Chair, that
Yeah.
we want to support carers as much as possible.
So I think if that could sort of be shared with the children's panel, and then any response to that, if that comes back to the adults panels, we have an understanding of what their thoughts are on that. That'd be really helpful.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move us on now to page 61 of the pack, which is Appendix 2, which is the Adults Housing and Health Directorate. So these are summarises the new proposed savings, budget pressures and capital proposals, all the directorates, and we're obviously just looking at adults and health. So it's 61 and then through to 66. There is some housing detail in there, which obviously we're not going to be covering. When we get to the new proposed savings, we are going to skip to page 81 and then come back again. It's just that's how the report's been written.
Sure.
So yes, so within Appendix 2, Neil, is there anything you want to particularly draw our attention to, particularly? And I know you've spoken a lot already around the savings.
I don't think there's anything to add, because I think we kind of covered the main summary of the budget changes. So I think we kind of covered that as part of the agenda.
And the new pressures in that line, that's a recurring
Yes,
things. When it says 0, that's actually,
it's no further increase,
but
but
it's built into,
yes, that's a new base since then.
right. And the same thing with the new savings, that'll be built in
Yes, correct.
future years.
I mean, it does mention above that the work to model demand pressures is ongoing.
Yeah.
And then that, yeah, then it talks about an updated MTFS will be included in the budget report in February 26. Sorry,
No, ask the way.
okay.
Yes.
It was in relation to the new pressures of 10.6 million. I think part of it, the 3.6 million,
Mhm.
which relates to staffing. I think that's something that Joe has spoken about before, and I think it is one of these investor saves. Using that extra 3.6 million to look at our staffing requirements, etc. Yeah. Yes. Ensuring the right workforce mix and also making sure that we don't breach our statutory duties under the Care Act, etc. So I think that just sounds as though it's an investor save, investor improve as well. The 7 million pounds, obviously you talk about inflation assumed at 4%, and then you also talk in those figures at 1.5, talk about the different the younger adults, the learning disability, and then mental health, primary care, and they all seem to increase at between 40 or 30, and there's one about 100. But there is the one right at the end, which is the physical disability primary need, which increases from 615 it increases actually by 172, which is a 28% increase. Is there any particular reason why you're forecasting that the physical disability needs would increase by that amount over the course?
Conversations around this, haven't we, Neil?
Yeah, it's a current trend. The last 2 years, we've seen a significant increase in those with a physical disability support need, younger adults. So it's just we're projecting that going forward that that trend's going to continue. We can't see the reason why it wouldn't. But whilst it's a big increase in number, cost-wise, the care package tend to be much smaller. So it is a less direct impact from a lower baseline. So it's something we have to recognise is that we have those cohorts we've highlighted there. So there's 4 main cohorts which covers probably about 8% of the cost of the placement budget.
Yes.
So we're trying to make sure that those ones were covered in the main. So we don't ignore we don't ignore the others, but those are the 4 main ones that have a biggest impact on our numbers.
3 of the 4 actually increasing by a relatively small amount.
Yeah.
Then there's the physical disability.
I would add as well, the learning disability increase is obviously it's reflecting and is back to the work we're doing around transitions. So the number of increase we've got there for learning disabilities 734 to 722 is based on what we understand expect to come through the system in the coming year. So it's used to have that rework we've done across the summer to help inform that.
Okay.
So it's not solely about trajectory, some of it's about understanding who we see expect to come through the system in the coming year.
I could hypothesise, Chair, although I'm not sure how useful that is. Building on Neil's point, the LD cohort, the learning disabilities cohort, tends to be one that's more predictable because on the whole, those children have EHCPs and can come through. We had a good discussion about that, didn't we?
Yeah.
Physical disabilities, if you had to push me on it, I might say that perhaps we're seeing people in their 50s and early 60s with greater complexity of health conditions, and that means they're needing more care and support.
I think that would be pretty much what we're seeing. Talking to Phil at Disability Action Haringey, that would be his reflection too.
And we could kind of extend that and say, you'll remember a couple of years ago, some of our NHS partners thought that they saw us in Haringey as having about 20% more people with long-term health conditions. Sometimes those health conditions in themselves aren't a physical, but they can affect your physical ability and mobility.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
That's Lauren.
Okay, thank you. A couple of questions. The first one, just thinking which one to do first. Maybe I could ask them. Yeah, let me start with this one. The cost pressure that you have put in for the following year for adult social care staffing, which is 3.6 million. I just want to understand a little bit about that, how you came up with that figure, and just maybe a follow-on question from that is that enough? I know it's always the question that says, is that enough? They say, no, not enough. But I just want to understand, is that a realistic figure, all the things that we want to achieve? And I assume this is also part of the digitization strategy. So could you maybe expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, of course. So is it enough? Well, it's a bit like an Oliver moment, isn't it? You only go back with another bowl of porridge, please. Gruel. I think what 3.6 million does for social care here is it gives us safety, and it gives us all the security that we've got enough staff to meet demand, and particularly to manage the statutory functions, to keep people safe, to undertake reviews, to fulfil our commissioning functions. So the service hasn't been invested in pre-CQC, because I know there's a big investment then for some time, I understand from Taryn, and I think as a result we were lean, and I do think that in some way CQC enabled us to have some external scrutiny that challenged that capacity and outed it very much in the report. And as you know, we then had Red Quadrant as well, who came in and did the same. So for me, DAS, it gives me assurance in this, with my statutory policy that we can fulfil our statutories. That's the first thing. So particularly the staffing is moving into the areas of highest demand, east. So we're doing some reconfiguration of the team. Bolstering the safeguarding team while we undertake the review, because the review may inform a bit of a restructure around how we fulfil our statutory duties in safeguarding. And then we've talked about some of the other functions that are critical for success and for improvement. So one area is around carers. Although that area of our work is not largely funded by the general fund, it's funded through Better Care Fund. So in delivering our carer strategy, we'll have more staff undertaking carer reviews, because that's something that is really important. But also for some of the key themes within the carer strategy that was at Cabinet on Tuesday evening. And then I've spoken a little bit about some of the other roles. We're going to have a complaints manager, forensic mental health social worker, peripatetic social worker. We're going to have someone to work alongside our principal social worker to make sure that the workforce development is really well embedded across the service. And that we get more stability of staffing, which is something that we're criticised about a fair bit, that we, you know, people get to know the social worker and then they're gone. And then somebody else starts a few weeks later, but you know, they didn't know the other person had gone. All of that very basic stuff. So that's the first bit. And we have a slide deck that we can share with Scrutiny just to give the high level posts that are coming in, if that's helpful. Everybody's getting that information at the minute. It's a bit of a Mexican way of joy. So have we got enough? I think with all the change that we're talking about and improvements we're talking about that need to be, as you know, we've got 10 areas of improvement in year one, aligned to the work on savings. I think, yes, it is enough, because I think when we start to manage and modernise the service, right, transformation is a different piece. I think we're modernising adult social care. I think we will better manage demand. Our placement budgets will come down, and we will have the right baseline of staffing. I don't know, it's not an exact art. You don't really know until you start making the change as to whether or not you've got enough. But to be blunt, there's not a social care team in this country that wouldn't say it would always be great to have another 30 social workers. You know, the truth is we're really glad to get 3.6 million growth. You know, it gives me confidence we can make the improvement and the savings we need to make over the 3-year period. Not everything will happen in year one. Some things will take a bit longer to bed down. But in terms of the savings, it's an imperative that we have the capacity to meet those now.
No, that's a very helpful question. Can I ask another one, maybe slightly provocative here? Is the 3.6 million something that you asked for? Did you ask for more? That's what you landed on.
That's not a provocative question at all. No, we looked at what we needed to be safe, genuinely, and that's how much it cost. Yeah, we didn't ask for more, and we worked really closely with. We've got a little powerhouse of a team with HR, finance, one of our business support managers, and our business service as well. So we've been working on this, on that business case for, well, as long as I've been here, a year. So we took it really seriously, and we started from the point of we have to be compliant. We have to make in-year savings, like every service in the council, as you know, on staffing. And then we started to build our business case based on evidence from CQC, from the Red Quadrant report. It took that long to present a compelling case, given our significant overspend. I'm sure you appreciate that it needed to be robust to be signed off.
Last one more question.
Yes.
So my follow on is the line on new savings. So I noticed here that under adult social care, we're making savings in 26-27, but we're not proposing any savings for the subsequent years. Is that correct?
You want me to come in first?
Yeah.
Edward? So I think it says with explicitly within the document that we're focusing on 26, 27 now, and Taryn very much wants us to deliver on everything we've already committed to.
Okay.
Because we've put a lot of resource into planning and savings across the council and doing budget series week. And hence we've got a lot more work to do to work on future savings. But
Okay.
bluntly, we've got to get the existing ones in the back.
We're going to concentrate on this, but maybe in the subsequent budgets, this may change. Is that what you're saying?
Imminently, we'll be working on the proposals coming.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this bit? I know you're still holding forth, Kathy. You're still holding because you're nearly on the new one, so we're nearly there for yours. But just checking with anyone else. I've got. So I've just got a couple of questions on that. So just following up on Councillor Hines' questions around the new money coming into social care staffing cost pressure. So the two questions that come to mind after doing this for many years is, one is that we've struggled, to be fair, to retain social workers. I mean, that's not just us. I know that's across the piece. But you have very clearly said at 1.6 that without having that increased support, we are at risk of breaching our statutory duties. Backlogs and assessment reviews impacting vulnerable residents, etc. So how confident are you in retaining the staff once they come into place? So that's my first question. And then the second question is around the 10 areas of improvement following the CQC inspection. I know you're looking at sort of those KPIs around that whole piece. So within that, are you expecting, so that's areas of improvement, that will obviously put an increased pressure on staff because they are looking to change the way, or it's a change of practice, or it's an addition, or it's something else. So again, it's going back to Councillor Harman's question, although that's the number that we want now, with these changes that we looking to embed, actually, will they still be under a bit of pressure because they're coming into a place where there's going to be a lot of changes? And finally, sorry, there was one other question, maybe to Neil, the new management actions. Sorry, you might have said what those were before, but just to clarify in this table, what under new savings, what the new management action is, because it's got varying amounts. So it's 358 in 26, 27, and then it's 668 at 27, 28. So it's just really, but sorry, Jay, start with you. If that's fine.
No, it's fine. Thank you. They're great questions. So I think, okay. So I think, without meaning to sound cheesy, you've really got to model leadership, and I think that's what I've been trying to do with staff. And how I do that, and there's different views on what good leadership looks like, aren't there? But I think calm is really important, because it is a really frenetic job. And I'm not a frontline worker, although I have been as a younger woman. But I think calm is what my experience tells me that staff need here. And I think real visible leadership. I've made myself really visible, and Sarah has as well, and Councillor Dasnebs has supported us in that too, so that people get a real sense of what working for adult social care in Haringey looks like now. And we've been really upfront with staff about the improvements we want to make, out in some issues maybe that needed out in, we know some of our systems aren't great, we acknowledge that it's hard for you, we want to work with you, and all the other things we've spoken about. I think there's a couple of things. Because being calm isn't enough, is it? I think communication with our staff is as important as it is with residents, members, and stakeholders. So we've put lots of different ways of communicating with staff, because not everybody reads newsletters, not everybody comes to lunch and learns. We've got an excellent, currently interim, but with a fair wind, maybe permanent, principal social worker. And she is, I think I've said to you, she's a local woman, been in the council for a good few years, I think about 8 years. She's very much trusted by the staff. You can just see the way they interact with her. You know, we're working on implementing the workforce race equality scheme because I think staff maybe questioned whether there were places for non-white leaders within the service, and they want to see career progression at all levels. So we're sweating here in this space because people will move on unless you give them reasons to stay. And I think I'm shortlisted at the minute for the principal social worker, and I looked at all the 8 people applied, some good candidates, but it was astonishing looking at the CVs how many people in London move jobs every 12 months. It made me feel a bit ill. I thought you've really got to work hard to keep people. Councillor Donovan gave me a look that maybe they needed to move on after 12 months. Maybe they were encouraged. But my point is this: in London, it's such a fluid environment to work in. People do move jobs a lot here. So I think we need to be special. And I think we need to just out some of the issues and get a really solid workforce development programme in place. And I think it's twofold. It's one, mandatory pieces. You're not getting away. You've got to do a finance session. You've got to do a session with carers where they'll talk to you. You've got to do a session on direct payments face to face. And then there's some of the lovely and wonderful developmental pieces that we intend to do with partners, which won't cost us anything. So the Mental Health Trust have already, the Early Intervention Service team have offered to do some sessions with us about, for instance, trauma-informed practice in return for something that we could offer them, maybe about deprivation, liberty, safeguards, etc., etc. You know, back to that partnership working again. And I think people need to see people that look like them growing up through the service, whether they're white, whether they're not white, whether they're disabled, whether they're young, whether they're older. It needs to be seen as a really inclusive service where people can grow and develop. And we need to celebrate a lot more. And I would say thank you to Councillor Dasnes for this. One of the first, we were talking about this on the way up, I've remembered another thing. One of the first things I thought when I got here is, wow, public health are really amazing. But, you know, where are the good news stories about social care? And there were some, but under your stewardship, we've done a lot more to promote some of the good things that happen within the service, because it can feel like a service where only the tricky and difficult and at times increasingly hard things happen. Same with housing. So we've done a huge amount there, and that has really had an impact on staff. And it will continue to. So I think the retaining staff thing, I think the biggest thing that will enable us, because we don't offer the most competitive salaries in London, nor the least. But I think working conditions and growth and development and equality and diversity and equity approach for all staff and comms, I think will continue to be really helpful in that space. On the 10 areas of improvement, I mean, what I love about our improvement plan, though it does need more work on the KPIs, is that we've delivered it today to an expanded leadership team that we've now got within the service. So heads of service, service managers, and the level below them, and now the leadership team. So I think it's about growing that golden thread piece around ownership of the leadership agenda. The improvement plan doesn't have anything we shouldn't be doing anyway. There's nothing on there that we shouldn't be doing anyway. There's nothing on there that we're not doing anyway. It's about how we're doing it, how well we're doing it, and what we need to do in each area to improve. And I think it's not asking staff to do anything above and beyond what they should be doing. And what I'm hoping for, working with HR, is that social care will pilot a new performance framework for staff, where everyone has a bit of the improved, bit of the corporate plan and our values, and then has a bit of the improvement plan featured within their performance plan. It'll be high level, but it will show them where they fit and what they contribute. And I think that's another reason why the retention piece is so important. You need to know where you fit. You don't need to feel you're coming to work every day and you're just dealing with a frenetic service, demand-led service that is quite tiring. Having said that, there will be a bit of pressure because we will be asking you to come again. Yeah. Let's be honest. And, you know, welcome to the real world, you know, that we're all accountable. So I think it's about, I think if you get the culture around the workforce development right, staff will want to come with you and they'll want to, not just me, us, that they'll want to do their best by us. I feel really confident about the workforce piece, as long as, once again, now we've got the capacity, the principal social workers, to him or her, the leadership capacity. I think something really is stuff in that space.
Okay, thank you. And the last bit on management. Or I'm looking to somebody on management actions.
Yeah.
Sorry, hazardous nerves then.
No, it's all right. New management actions. I think there's something in there which is about just using the public health grant effectively, especially as it has growth in there, and also making sure that we're maximising income from health. Okay, things like some of the services that we'll see at Roger Sylvester, for example, Clarendon Recovery College. You know, in other places, health makes a contribution to those services, so there's a bit of work there, I think. And then there's something which is a bit business as usual. Joe will explain it better than me, I think. Electronic call monitoring. So that's about making sure that when our providers are when our providers are providing care, that we have a sort of digital electronic way of checking that they did actually do what they said they do, and therefore they're charging the right thing.
Okay.
So if someone misses a visit, or we were told there'd be an hour visit, but it was only half an hour, that they only charge us that. There seems to be some electronic mechanism for doing that. We didn't have it, and then we will have it. So I think there's bits of that. And then I think in there as well, although it says new management actions, I thought that the continued work we're doing on CHC and 117, section 117s, is in there too. I got that wrong. Because that's a journey, that's every year, keep doing, but because business as usual, it's part of how it's right.
Yeah.
And just to, sorry, Neil, I was going to say we've got 3110 looking at the 117 piece, just in terms of our evidence base, to look at how the boroughs fare in that space. And I think that's hugely helpful for us, because you don't know how powerful an argument you've got until you compare yourself with others. And we've got very powerful arguments in section 117 and CHC.
Yeah, and I'd add that I am having ongoing conversations with our MPs as well about that. I think I've shared with many people before some of the information that's out there now, publicly available on the differentials of different ICB regions. So trying to talk to as many people as possible about that.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I think that helps, because it's just because it was one figure and then next year it's up to 668. So is there something that's particularly changing in that, or is that
That's
funny?
It's just the profile over the period. Yeah.
It was just strange. I just went, okay, that, and then it's back down again. So I just wondered if there was something in that you're specifically doing that's different from your business as usual, that is literally just going to be in that year. But if nothing comes to mind, if something does.
So it's scaling up this opportunity, because obviously there's a bit of mobilisation in 26, 27, and start to realise the full benefits in 27, 28. Then they've realised, and the figure drops back down again.
Okay, so we've got one last question, and then we'll move on to Councillor Brenner's new budgets, new savings.
As we're talking about the topic you were just talking about, and changing the culture, I've mentioned before, and I don't know that we would need to put more money into the service in order to do this, but for me, I think social work is one particular profession where the people with the probably lowest paid are on actually public facing, and I feel that any change has to be with them, because I have had, in my experience, quite shocking experience with the actual person who was dealing with people, and then I've dealt with people who are high up, and the problem wasn't there. So I really feel that if we're talking about changing culture, we should not be changing management. Great, In middle management, great, but the people who are doing the public facing are at the bottom. It's so important that they do actually carry out and follow the ethics that we think, that we want the staff to. And I think sometimes it is sort of like gets presumed because higher up the training has happened and whatever, that it's being carried out in reality. I just had, admittedly only one case, but my goodness, I was so shocked. Really, really.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant point. I'll be honest, I think the workforce piece, in my experience, it just needs to be layered, because I think there are so many issues that can arise at different levels, including my level as well, at all levels. So I would say we need to have a focus on managers. We need to ensure that people are getting professional supervision, practice supervision, as they are entitled to as social workers, and that people haven't grown into management positions without the proper training, so that they're clear of their expectations. It's very different when you step into management, as we are now. It's very different to being a frontline member of staff. You might think you've earned your stripes because you've been around a few years, but it's how you treat staff and leadership and leading by example and all of those pieces. On your point about the frontline staff, I think you're absolutely spot on. But the way, in my experience in my last job, I was there 9 years, and the learning disability team when I got there was almost overly compassionate in their response. I won't unpick that now, but they weren't very businesslike. They were very kind and decent people, and really kind and decent people, and that's a lot. But there were many of the failings, and I think over time we built up and bolstered the team. Many people stayed, but some people did leave because they didn't like the business-like new approach. But you've got to, once again, you've got to be everything if you're a frontline worker. You've got to be efficient, otherwise residents come to yourselves and say the social worker said they'd get back in 3 weeks and they haven't. You've got to be a broker. Anyway, I don't need to explain to you. You need to be many things. It's a hugely skilled job. And the way to give you assurance around that question, I would say, is you need to grow, develop, monitor, manage, and those staff. So you've got a standard, so that whoever picks up the phone in social care, you're going to get largely get the same sort of tone and response. And at the minute, I would agree, we don't have that. I couldn't give you that absolute assurance. We're getting there. But I get all of your feedback and Councillor Dasnev's feedback, and I'm glad to get the feedback, because everybody matters that's in the service. That the manager's smiling and turning up and being efficient and effective is amazing. Got many amazing staff that are with residents all the time, and the residents tell me they're amazing. But it's the frontline social workers that are important, because they're working with the people that are bluntly, often in their own home, most vulnerable, desperate for somebody that actually does a really fantastic job for them. That's what they need. So that is an absolute priority now.
I think you're spot on. You know, there's nothing, no two ways about it. The only thing that heartens me is I've also met some of our really good staff who are modelling all those right behaviours, and you know them when you meet them. You just know because of how they are with you. You just know what that experience is going to be like, and I think those people who will grow and develop and help other people, I think, kind of understand a Haringey way to deliver for people. So it's there and it's possible. And some people have got all those skills in bags, and some people just need support, you know. And it might be that for some people, Haringey isn't the right place for them. But absolutely. I think for the most part, I think we can get there. And I've certainly met one or two staff who have thought, wow, you really know how to work with people. It's really clear they're at the peak of whatever you call it, relational work.
Yeah.
So it's there, and hopefully you'll meet some of them as well at some point if you've had some tricky experiences with them.
I came across, sorry if I could just reply, I came across really excellent social workers as well, because on a particular case, in the end, one social worker changed, and then there was fantastic social workers. But I was suddenly surprised, and as you say, I suppose it is management, because if you really had monitored what the particular social worker that I and my resident was dealing with, and I ended up, if it had been properly monitored by the management,
100%.
that was not acceptable. It was, even for anybody who would say it's not acceptable.
100%. And I think, sorry not to lose track of time, Councillor, but I think you can see a lot from case file audits. So Patrice will lead all of that work. She's leading all of that work on case file audits. And the manner in, not everybody's a writer. We were having this discussion on the way I work. Not everybody writes beautifully. They just don't. We're all different. But the tone and the way people express what they see when they meet residents over all of my years of work, I now know is a very good indicator as to how good a social worker they are. Even if they don't write beautifully, they should write in a certain way, a respectful way, non-judgmental way, that gives you insight into their professional training and the way they view their job. So, you know, all of the checks and balances that you're saying, and more, and feedback from members and from residents directly, they give you great insight too.
Thank you. Thank you. So just on this section here, I think one of the recommendations is around, it's not around the money going in. I think we agree, you know, from the panel, I'd imagine that's we would be very positive about that. I think it's just the risk around staff leaving again, and it's retaining of the workforce. And you've mentioned this 10 areas of improvement following CQC inspection. You've mentioned around you know, a better oversight of staff. You've mentioned around, you know, much more workforce development for them and sharing with partners around how that works, and they get, you know, they get that shared learning. But the risk for us is what it says at 1.6. If we don't, it's not, in a strange way, it's not without securing the funding, but it's if staff don't stay in spite of having the funding in place, you know, we've got the risk in adult social care, and you said about breaching statutory duties, backlogs and assessments and reviews. And I think for us, Care Act assessment is one of those ones that has been on the agenda for a long time. And I think for us as a panel, it'd be really interesting or really good to come back and understand where we are when we've got that new staffing in around the care assessment process and how long that's now taking and what that improvement is, because that's an on the ground. And I know you're going to do doing the spot checks as well about not just the fact it's been done, but it's been done well. It's been done. Yes, and that would be really helpful to get that sort of joined up approach on that. So that would be a recommendation, I would say, from the committee. Is there anything else on that around that one section?
No.
Right, we need to go on to the next area, which is the proposed, hang on, no, it is the proposed new budget savings, which is on, mentions that on page 62, but I'd like you now to turn to page 81 in your pack, because this is actually the, right, and if you can remember right to the very beginning when Councillor Brennan asked the question around the financial strengthening of the financial assessment process and with the charging policy. So it's going right back to looking at, I read this proposal, and to me, two questions on top of Councillor Brennan's questions came to mind. It's really around how much money, you know, we haven't been doing this now for a long time. Well, I remember this coming to scrutiny, in fact, budget scrutiny many years ago, with a proposal around how we improve this process. So at that point, I understood that we were losing money because we weren't collecting the money in a timely fashion, and then it was too late and things had moved on. So do we have an insight into how much money we think we might have missed? Because then it's really important to understand. So if we think we haven't collected £500, that's a very different conversation to if you say to us as a committee, actually, councillors, I think we might have missed £200,000 over 3 years or whatever it is. So do we have any understanding of where on the collection process, what figures are we looking at? Because obviously, in order to get the financial assessment process right and the charging policy, I'm assuming you're looking at where things haven't been going well, and you've obviously had some figures around that. So, if you could answer that one, then
Yeah, we can all chip in.
thank you.
Yeah.
I think I want to come in first, if that's okay. I think just to be really clear, Chair, there's two things. There's not collecting the money that we should collect, and then there's this. That's a slightly different thing to what's proposed here, if that makes sense. We had a pilot project to look at how we could put in more resource into doing assessments earlier and being better at managing that process. It was very productive. That was 2 years ago. I think we brought in 11 or 12 million pounds. That was vital and important. This proposal in front of you is slightly different, because what we're saying is, at the moment, you start charging on the day that you, once you've had your financial assessment, etc., which is different to the day first that we'll care. I don't know if any of the people, either my side, have any sense of how much we could have made if we'd done that in the past, but we weren't doing that. And we've penned it, I suppose, as an invest to save, because what we've said is, of course, to do that, that means being really more efficient and effective at doing financial assessments, making that process happen earlier on and more quickly, no matter what else is going on for us. So if we invest in that, we think, and that I'm right in saying that, we can then actually implement a policy like that. Without the extra support, we can't. And of course, the other important thing I think to say that others might say is that, of course, the clock is not just one-sided. It's not just about the time we take. Rather, we'll put it another way. It's we will start charging once a person has is in receipt of care. Of course, if we're not good at doing all that process, then we can't charge.
No.
But the flip side is what we won't have, what we shouldn't allow for fairness, is possibly what could happen now, which is if I run down the clock, if I take a long time, and I'm afraid to say, I have experienced cases in my inbox a bit where perhaps it's taken a long time to identify the details of the house in France, for example, and things like that. That might mean that somebody else gets those details more quickly to us, and we start charging. In the spirit of fairness, as long as we've got our ducks in a row, we have to turn the clock off if we're taking time, because it's taking us time to get our heads around whatever it is. We need to stop the clock, but as long as we do that, then it's fairer, because it means we're charging everyone from earlier on in the process. But that's slightly different to collecting what we're owed and not being good at collecting, if that makes sense.
It's awful. I think for me, it's understanding. I completely hear what you're saying around starting the clock at the point where they get their care, and then collecting the money in a timely fashion. Everyone is up
No,
front.
that's not what I mean. Right now, the clock starts once you've had your financial assessment. That's when you start being charged.
Right.
Whereas what we're proposing is you're charged from the day that you receive care.
Right.
That
Okay.
makes sense. So
Yeah.
if it took us, historically, I don't know what it could take. Let's say I'm plucking a finger out of the air. I can't tell you, Joe, or tell me anything. If it's taken us 3 months, we wouldn't charge you those 3 months. If it took longer, or if it took less, we wouldn't be charging you until you'd had the financial assessment. Am I correct?
I think, yeah, you are correct. And I think the way you described it's really helpful. I would just add a couple of bits. So I think there's a whole bit of governance around this that Taryn leads, again, doesn't she know, around age debt. And it's a fantastic bit of work. If finance is your thing, a few people in social care are really into finance. So we've got good representation on that age debt governance to grow our understanding of, how we need to be more efficient And I just wanted to bring into that we've Disability Action Haringey
Mhm.
have just won a big contract, not from the council,
Mhm.
on information advice and guidance. 2 contracts actually, 3 years, over 3 years. And they are going to work with the Age Debt Board because they have always been concerned around financial assessments for disabled residents that find out too late what their contributions might be, and they just say, I can't afford that. And the risk is always they'll say, you know, stuff it, I'll do without the care, which then puts them in a very risky situation and potentially lead towards a crisis, all the things we're familiar with. So I think DAH are going to be massively important in this space. And the other thing to mention is that we talked about Safeguarding Circle, undertaking our safeguarding review, and they know that we're aware and all those other things. They also are very much involved in the age debt work, aren't they, Neil? And they're doing a standard operating procedure to support us in this space to make sure that we're avoiding and managing any safety risks. So I think the piece of work stacks up financially, but I think in terms of safeguarding, in terms of respectfully supporting our disabled and non-disabled residents, it's just it's definitely what I would call a huge low-hanging piece of fruit, but it's been managed really well across the whole council. Don't know, Neil, if there's anything else you would add on about that piece of work.
I think historically we've not been good at managing our debt, and the end-to-end process has been weak because we haven't joined up with different parts of the council to support the process. We've been effective in doing that. I think what we're ensuring now, going forward, we have better end-to-end processes from the point of the care being put in place by the social worker and what information is given from the outset to the point of collection, because in the past often that didn't often work smoothly, and as a result perhaps debt accumulated because it was seen as somebody else's job, perhaps. So it sat with our collection team, and that has to change because everybody has to be involved in that process to ensure the individual is kept up to date about the situation, the debts recovered, and it's not then accumulating to large sums. So we have processes in place we're developing. We have a programme board which working really hard to ensure we collect what debt we can. So working with legal colleagues, working with other officers across the council, and we're also ensuring that where debt can no longer be recovered for whatever reason, then we have a process to try and get it off our books. So when we've exhausted everything else. So we've done everything we can to try and recover it. So that process is underway and it's robust, and we're feeling in a good place now.
This is an income generation, so
This is completely different.
So you're looking at doing £909,000 of income generation.
So it's actually more than that because it's in total just over a million, 1,080,000. It also accounts for additional staff as well. So I think if you read the detail, there's 3 additional staff. So yeah, I should realise that that saving was an investment of staffing the tune of about 171,000 to actually achieve that.
Okay, so, but that's still a substantive amount of money that you are going to be bringing in, hopefully, as a council back into and rightly into the correct place.
Yeah.
So I suppose the question that I'm going to ask is, because we haven't been doing this for so long, are we, is this the sort of money that we haven't been collecting over previous years? Because if we're collecting it now, why would it be different 2 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever it is? So I'm just trying to work out, because this is something that has come through in adults scrutiny on budget before. So I'm just trying to place.
I don't know if we've ever discussed charging people from a different point. I think we've talked about. I don't remember us discussing it, but you might have before my time as well. And that's a fair point. I suppose. Sure, we've certainly missed out on money, but we obviously didn't have the ability to put that resource in, or we didn't feel that we were able to. Of course, it's based on how many care packages we think we will be achieving next year, and bearing in mind that quite a few people don't make contributions. So it's based on that figure, isn't it? That figure is based on what we've anticipated will be care packages that people make contributions to.
Yeah.
Next year.
It was just an observation that it just seemed logical, you know, if we were talking about data and figures, and I like looking at money weirdly, and just because I find that leads to all sorts of understandings of where things have happened in the past or haven't happened in the past. So I think this is it looks like a really great initiative, and I'm just wondering if there are, you said, low-hanging fruit. And if there are other areas in the and I know it's really hard in adults to try and find anything to get that income generation, but these are the sorts of things that, hopefully can really help to some extent. Councillor Brennan.
Well, seeing it purely as a positive thing going forward, well, it is a positive, I think, because we will get more money. I presume it's positive. The one thing that I was a little bit worried about, but I think you've sort of sorted it out for me, was that what for people on benefits, but people on benefits don't pay at all, am I right? Because how could it possibly work for people on benefits that you start charging them from the beginning? Will they get it paid on benefits? Will somebody pay for them? They don't have to pay, isn't that right?
It would depend what benefits they
Yeah,
were on.
exactly. Yeah, so
And
it's a minimum guarantee.
I'm just thinking, I was just a bit worried when you were talking about the fact that people, I'm rather thinking about personal people's budgeting, but when you're talking about people suddenly discovering that they owed too much for their care and they couldn't afford it, they should never, that's all very well, but then what are they supposed to do? Not have care? How does that work if you're saying that it's really bad that they suddenly discover that they can't afford the care that they're getting, or they're not meant to get that, and that then maybe they have to say they don't want the care? But it almost sounds like we just say from the beginning, you can't have that care because you can't afford it.
So I think in a good end-to-end process, just and slightly answers Pidler's question, sorry, Councillor Connor's question as well. If you it is like a pipeline piece, isn't it? So from the onset, a resident needs to go and get the right information, advice and guidance about adult social care and what they might be charged for care, so that they can make informed decisions. And what it's describing on the very bottom of the page is that it's all of the council, and this is where I think we've got opportunities going forward as a council, is where you've got interdependencies between different bits of the council, is where often for residents in their journey, it becomes most difficult. So you can see here, social workers in my last authority did the financial assessments. First point of contact with the resident, they had a really nice, accessible little leaflet that said, adult social care in Hammersmith. Now, people didn't pay for care in Hammersmith before, but they did pay for other things. So the point is they handed that, and the financial assessment was or wasn't undertaken, but it was done at the first point of contact. Here, I think what you quickly move into, if it doesn't happen in a person-centred way, is that it's something punitive, and none of us want that, because as you say, Councillor Brennan, if you did get into a position where you owe money, it could be massively stressful for you. How am I going to pay it back? So you're going to be £5 a week. Will they accept that? And local authorities generally, we as local authorities, in different teams, we have different expectations about communication. So some of our services write in very legalese language, and Neil's out the room, so I can say this now. And some finance teams, I live with an accountant, when my partner writes a letter, I think, good grief, you sound like you're the bank manager, could you not maybe nuance that a little bit? But culturally, different teams work in different ways. This is about bringing everybody together and going, first and foremost, this is about us getting it really clear for residents from the outside, the right support to answer those difficult questions, and then services working together. And I'm not on the board, several of my team are. I've heard it's a brilliant board. So how Taryn has managed that, I know not. It's very digestible and very person-centred, and everyone can see the benefits, because once people are in debt, same with direct payments, where maybe they owe the council money, the letters that go to them just add to their issues.
Yes.
They really do. It's a position of last resort to get a resident to be in debt.
So I think this is a really person-centred piece. In beneath the detail, it's about us working as a whole system to make things better for a resident and have less handoffs.
Yeah, and I'd add just something, which is I think that a lot of people still don't know that people make contributions to adult social care. And so, and I've certainly met people from historic places from some time ago who were just a bit surprised by that and didn't know about it. And it really, that's a reality for almost every local authority in the country. We do require people to have a financial assessment and make a contribution. So it does seem sensible that we have that conversation up front. Now, politically, we might say we would like a place in the world where people didn't have to. A lot of us do think like that, but we are where we're at now, and now there's a little bit of injustice built in, which is that, you know, to be blunt, and I would never like to suggest that this would happen, but if I string out, if Joe comes to assess me for my financial assess for my social care, and then I string out the giving you the financial assessment in necessary information, I could save myself a bit of money, couldn't I? And if I don't know to string it out because I don't know to do that, then I might be paying earlier, and that's that kind of inbuilt injustice. So that's why we just addressed this, even though, let's be honest, and speaking to your previous question, Pippa, I feel I want to answer it. You know, let's be honest, charging is difficult, and not everyone feels comfortable with that, but it is a reality in this country, social care. We do pay, we may have a contribution, and we are expected to. So it is uncomfortable. And I think I wanted to answer that other bit of nuance I think they're asking, Pippa, which is, do we think other local authorities have different charging policies? I think everyone is doing this, so it's great, we've caught up. Do we think they're doing more severe and more things that cost people more money? I think other boroughs probably are, but at this point, we feel that given the financial pressures we see on residents and their vulnerability and some of our figures around, volumes, we think this level of change is the right kind of change for us. But there are definitely other local authorities charging more and in different ways than we are. But we're not looking at that at the moment because we don't think that's the right thing for us.
So it's getting to 9:30. Sorry, Councillor Brennan. People are going to complain when you walk out the door at 10. You get cross with me and you say we need
tiny thing, which was
Yeah,
that I
very
actually
tiny.
really support the policy. It does actually seem absolutely nutty to start nowhere do you start having a service without paying for it for ages and then pay for it. I just worried about the vulnerable, but I do support the policy. I'm sorry, but you've got to. Sorry,
No, that's fine. I just want making sure. So I think we've read and understood the new saving or the income generation proposal, I should say, on page 81. I think my recommendation is from the committee that we see that it's a necessary piece of work. It seems to have covered areas, and I think you've said today what you do in circumstances that were difficult for residents, and it's around assurance, I suppose, for the committee that people who are on lower incomes, that it wouldn't leave them without care. And I think that's the reassurance that we were asking for today. And as I've understood it, Joe, you've answered that. And I think for myself, it was really around understanding that this is money that it's great we're bringing in now to adult social care because we desperately need it. But it was for me to understand we haven't done it in the past. So it's a bit of if we'd done it earlier, we would have generated income earlier. So the recommendation that I would have is, are there any other pieces where we can join up that? I mean, you said Taryn's put in this new structure, you've got that financial look. Are there any other of these income generation? And I'm sure this is going to be what you're discussing, but I suppose as a committee, this is our sort of challenge, I suppose, back to yourselves, is what else is there? Because we were having, you're right, Councillor Neves, this wasn't the exact conversation we were having in scrutiny, but we were skirting around, this is sort of what we were looking at many years ago. And it's frustrating to think if we hadn't realised it hadn't been quite joined up. And at that point, you think, oh, another 4 or 5, 6 years of income generation would have, been better than nothing, as they say. So I think it's just to sort of have that as an understanding that, we hear this, it looks really good. It hopefully will generate that income, and hope, our challenges, are there any other pieces of work out there with, again, that same sort of, when you look at it afresh, you think, oh yeah, why isn't that happening? So that's really helpful to have. So thank you. And if there are any figures, Neil, on what we think we could have generated, just from my financial
Chair, I could
perspective.
just say something else as well, which is, I think my understanding, and it was before my time as a cabinet member, so you appreciate it, was that I think in the pandemic at some point we stopped doing these things, and it fell out of practice. That's my understanding. That's certainly what I've heard. And
I think there was some during the pandemic we actually probably stopped chasing debt to the same degree as we normally do. And I think that's my understanding of what I've heard anyway, but I couldn't.
So then I think it then fell out of practice, as I understand it, as a behaviour. So I can't say for sure that we weren't doing that before.
No, this was definitely pre-pandemic. I've been here too long. Anyway, so this is not good.
Memory predates me.
Yeah, well, no, this is not good.
Could I say just something very brief?
Yeah.
Very briefly, and I know we're not going to be discussing it in any detail today, but it's the saving on page 82, which is obviously part of the adult health and communities. But it is dealt with by housing, and that's a reduction in the contracts and floating support. And they talk about a 35% reduction in contact value. And then they're going to centre it, that floating housing support, much more on the most complex needs. And I suppose it does relate to what Joe was saying in relation to advice and guidance, and trying to help people at an early stage, because then things don't get even more complex, and then it's adults social care that then have to pick them up. So it's not necessarily to discuss this saving, which will be discussed in another place, but actually, is there a way through the year that we could monitor the effect on this? If they are helping less people and assisting people with more complex needs, does that mean people with complex needs, but maybe not the most complex needs, are then seeking other advice and other support, which isn't being met by this floating support, which I think do a really vital job?
So have housing had their budget scrutiny yet, Dominic?
No, that's either Monday or Tuesday next week.
Right. Could I request that we ask that, or we could speak to the chair and say that this has been suggested, if we could have a sort of an understanding on what this proposal is going to impact the residents. And Councillor Donovan, could you put forward a question to Dominic, who can then send it in sort of on our behalf into the housing, and then ask your second bit is about how that information is brought back to adults.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So you structure that question, and then we can take it as a recommendation.
Yeah.
Because I admit I had a quick look, but I suddenly realised it wasn't us, so I stopped looking in detail. So I don't want to sort of try and give anything more concrete at this point. But if you do that, because you've obviously looked at it, we'll take that as a recommendation.
Okay.
But working alongside our housing colleague,
Okay.
housing scrutiny.
That hasn't on Monday evening, so we need the details sorted out tomorrow.
So if you could put that question in tonight when you get home at midnight. Sorry, this is a lot of work going on here, Councillor Loki.
It's a scrutiny committee, it's adults and health scrutiny panel. So why wouldn't we discuss it here?
So I saw it was
A mistake.
yes, it's the officers are
Even
Okay.
Dominic. Or was it us, Don? Was it us?
So
I did
It's
confirm it was housing panel, so.
you look at the
led
cabinet.
by the housing part. Yeah, it's the,
That and things.
They're doing.
But because Sarah, we've got that oversight now between adults and housing, so Councillor Donovan, if you could
Yeah.
do that, that'd be fantastic. Right, I'm going to move us on really quickly. We've got one last thing on appendix, appendix, is it 3, page 67. No, hang on a sec. 6. Locality hubs.
The capital budgets.
Ah, yeah. Earlier on. 66, that's why I'm not seeing it. Yes, you're completely right. Sorry, page 66. It's the last one I spotted under adults and health. Proposed changes to capital programme. There's a locality hub, and in 26, 27, we've got a the original budget decision not to progress these, but some budget cost was required to Northumberland Resource Centre. The reason I'm asking this is because obviously locality hubs is something that I thought we were looking to do in the green sort of area, the middle bit, and then the west. So I was just a bit confused as to why there was a reduction in this budget here unless.
well, I don't think we've got proposed, I think my understanding was we don't have a proposed, and we have our localities model in operation already.
Yes.
East, west and central. The first hub was to be in the east.
Yeah. Northumberland Park.
And my understanding was because it's based in a council building, actually some of that can be funded from the HRA.
Right.
That was my understanding. And maybe Sarah could she'd be here, as you know, but she couldn't be.
History, yeah.
But she could probably do you a written just a bit more on that one. But I don't have on the table concrete plans that are fully formed about what central, west, and some of that depends a little bit on the work we're doing with health and
100%.
So that's
That's all I was going to say.
and
Yeah,
because we
many
had a vision for, as you know, a new health hub in the Sutherland Green area, which would accommodate both. Excuse me, get a breaky voice. Would both accommodate increased GP resource, which we need.
Yeah.
For example. But as you know, there's been some challenges on the funding from health there. So it's a kind of watch this space. But I think what we're not doing, Neil can answer this, is we're not putting in the way that perhaps in the past we might have put something in thinking
To hold.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
We're holding. But we're
Okay.
not doing that.
Fine.
We're being very concrete, given the financial constraints about.
So this is coming to JOSC next Friday, and actually I specifically asked around this locality hubs
I
and
think that'll be excellent.
what they're going to help us in health. And anyway,
Yes,
so
how we're going
watch,
to have more GP places.
watch this space.
Yeah.
Okay, so that question is coming up. So I just thought I'd clarify because it's the last bit and it was under capital programme and there wasn't anything else in the capital programme.
Yes.
No, okay. Is that because we just don't have anything? Sorry, I'm just really I'm asking them really obvious questions.
That changes the capital programme, it's not the capital programme for total.
It's not a capital programme overall. Yeah.
But I mean, I think we talked about it earlier. We're not overstretching ourselves, nor is anyone putting any things in the budget that are very theoretical.
Right.
Idea we might explore.
Got a bit to land.
We've got quite a lot on our
And-
plate.
And
Definitely,
certainly